Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Sean.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning,
Good
Glenn.
morning,
Good morning, Sue. Hi,
Good
Sarah.
morning, Councillor Gower. Good morning, Councillor Kavanagh.
So formal.
Trying to be professional, it's hard for me.
I know what you mean.
Hello, Commissioner Wright Gilbert. How are you? Hello, Glenn.
That's so funny. I was just about to say good morning, Councillor Cloutier.
Good morning. Morning, Councillor Kavanagh.
Morning, Sean. I'm not going to call you Councillor Fern right now.
Okay.
Not till they say we're rolling.
Morning, Teresa. How the hey are you?
I can't hear them.
Drying up.
That's all the way up to
It's a
100.
wet one out there.
At the bottom, does it say audio settings?
Mr. Greer, I think you're talking. We can, in fact, hear you. just so you know.
Can you? Can you hear now?
We can hear you. Yes.
Morning, everybody. We'll get started in a minute here. We'll just give everybody a chance to get on. Okay, so we're good to go. All right, good morning and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Transit Commission. I believe that all members are able to attend today's meeting, but before we proceed, we'll do a quick roll call of the members. I believe Commissioner Olson is traveling, but he's informed the clerk that he'll be able to participate by phone. I'll remind everyone that we need 7 members present to maintain quorum. Councillor Suds, I see you're here. Councillor Gower. I see you. Councillor Kavanaugh.
I'm here. Thank you.
Councillor Tierney. Councillor McKenney. I haven't seen Councillor McKenney.
I'm hiding. No, I'm right here.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Councillor Brockington, are you here this morning?
I am here, Chair.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Caricato?
I'm here, thanks.
Thank you. And Commissioner Olson, we mentioned at the start, and Commissioner Williams isn't going to be able to join us for, I believe, the next 2 meetings, she said. And Commissioner Wright Gilbert, you're here.
Good morning.
And morning. And Vice Chair Kluche.
Bonjour, Chair.
Thank you. We are again participating in this meeting electronically via Zoom. Instructions for members of the public wishing to submit comments or participate as a delegation in this meeting were included in the agenda. Those who do not need to participate in the meeting can watch the live stream on the city's YouTube channel. For those who are participating in the meeting, please keep your microphones muted until I call on you to speak. I will provide each commission member with the opportunity to ask questions or comments in due course. Commission members will be called on first, followed by any other member of council who has joined the meeting. At any point, if you want to speak, you should use the raised hand function on Zoom, which you will find by opening the attendees list using the Zoom controls at the bottom of your Zoom window near the audio controls. The coordinator and I will be watching for these cues. The usual 5-minute speaking limit will apply. Now, before we turn to our agenda, I'd just like to offer a couple of remarks here, if I may. Got them here somewhere. There we go. I just want to start today's Transit Commission meeting by taking a few minutes to draw your attention to the fact that this year marks the 150th anniversary of public transit in Ottawa. To help celebrate the milestone, OC Transpo launched an amazing virtual museum on octranspo.com on September 30th. The virtual museum is an interactive space where guests can explore the moments that defined our city's transit system, and it's actually fun for everyone too. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. From streetcars that were once pulled by horses to the red and white transit fleet that we see around our nation's capital today, we've certainly come a long way. Since the Ottawa City Passenger Railway Company made the debut in 1870, public transit has played a vital role in the economic development, community growth, and equal opportunities for our residents. For many people in our city, public transit is essential today as well. To access health services and employment opportunities. Throughout our history, in good times and difficult times, transit has been there to keep us moving. For example, during the influenza Spanish flu epidemic in 1918, the streetcars received enhanced cleaning. This kept them moving, enabling customers to go about their daily lives. During the Second World War, 5 of the new buses were painted Kalaki green in case they were needed in the war effort. When a massive ice storm hit our city in 1998, OC Transpo provided transportation for military personnel, and extra buses were on constant standby in case of emergencies. And most recently, on March 17th, the province of Ontario declared a state of emergency as COVID-19 began to spread. Transit use was encouraged only for essential trips, and additional health and safety measures to keep passengers and people as safe as possible while traveling were put in place. OC Transpo service continues to be essential to move people and our city forward during economic recoveries. As you can see, transit has always been there through thick and thin with us. And the reason OC Transpo has been able to continue this long-standing legacy is because of people, the backbone of the organization. The people at OC Transpo continue to work day and night, to keep our city moving at all times. Their dedication and professionalism is admirable, and they care deeply about what they do. On October 7th, we celebrated the Canadian Urban Transit Association's Transit Operator and Worker Appreciation Day to recognize our transit employees. I wanted to take this opportunity today to once again say thank you to each and every one of our employees. The work you do keeps our city moving, and we appreciate you. Thank you. So now we'll move on to the agenda. And first off, is there any declaration of interest? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the confirmation of the minutes. We have minutes number 16 from the Transit Commission meeting of Wednesday, September 16th. Are these minutes confirmed, or is there any comments?
Confirmed.
Confirmed.
Confirmed, thank you. So next up, we have communications. So next under communications, we have a response to council for the inquiry 20-17 is noted. This was to have been listed on the last agenda, but was missed due to an administrative error. If anyone wishes to lift this off the agenda, we will have to approve that by the rules of procedures being waived to add it. As such, it would be discussed as an additional item at the end of the agenda. But I believe that any questions on this matter can be addressed as well by Mr. Manconi in his presentation. Does anyone want to lift the inquiry?
Sorry, Chair, I just want to, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Is this the update on the electric bus procurement?
I believe so. Hold on a second, Catherine. I don't have that right in front of me here.
Oh, the electric bus procurement is the information previously distributed item, Chair. This is the item that was a council inquiry from July.
Okay, so sorry, so it's the IPD that I want to lift. So sorry about that.
Okay, so that's at the end here. So then no one's lifting the inquiry. So next up is we have two items on the agenda, and I believe staff have presentations on both. So we'll just proceed now with item number 1, which is the Confederation Line and Bus Service Update. Mr. Manconi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. We have a presentation from you, from Mr. Charter and Mr. Scrimgeour. The first part deals with the train service and the work that's been going on there. The second part is we wanted to give you a general update on our recovery plan vis-a-vis COVID. On the LRT, significant progress continues to be made. You're going to see those new stats that we introduced at the last meeting, that reliability is up significantly. We're consistently getting 15 double trains and a hot spare from RTM. So that is going very well. You're also going to hear from Troy. He's going to give you an update on the 7 elements of the plan that was put forward in terms of rectification. Great progress on all fronts there. All work has either been completed or will be nearing completion shortly. And so we have updates for you on that. What's critical is, how do we answer the question, will this reliability be consistent? And there's 2 things on that. As I noted at the last update, our follow-up work by our independent experts has begun. So we're looking at that and we'll report out accordingly when that work is done. But that's to validate that the rectification plan work has been completed and to see if there's any other concerns. And then also a reminder that the true test is winter, how we get through the winter season. We've done a lot of work. You're going to hear from Troy that there's been a lot of work with the new management team over at RTM to enhance winter operations and prop them up in terms of some of the lessons learned from last year. And then just before I turn it over, the chair to Troy and to Pat, I want to just touch on, in addition to the LRT work, the department's been very, very busy responding to COVID and sustaining the services to our community. And also, I'm happy to report that on the departmental work plan, there was 12 priorities that you approved. All work is progressing very well. We have the e-bus update that there was some slippage because of COVID on the tendering. The only other 2 that have some slippage on reporting only, the work is done or being done, is the marketing and advertising report will move from the end of the year to the Q1, and same with the performance reporting. But I'm very proud of the men and women of OC Transpo because they've done a phenomenal job of sticking to those 12 priorities and the corporate plan and ensuring that we continue to deliver that service, even though most of our staff, certainly in the white collar environment, are working remotely. So hats off to the team. And now I'll turn it over to Mr. Charter.
Okay, thank you, John. And good morning, Chair, Councillors, and Transit Commissioners. If you can move to the next slide, please, that'd be great. So as Mr. Manconi indicated, this is the agenda that we'll be following for the presentation today, and I'll be focusing on the performance of Line 1 and the update on the rectification plan. Next slide, please. So I'm going to begin today's presentation by giving you an overview of the recent performance of Line 1, followed by the update of the corrective actions associated with the rectification plan. And this is information, that we're providing an update from the information that was presented at the September Transit Commission meeting. So overall, with the performance for line 1, there's 3 graphs that we're going to review. You're looking at the first one here. You've seen this one consistently. This first graph provides, the broad summary of the monthly service trend. You'll note that for the month of September, we finished the month with 98% of scheduled service delivered. And so far for the month of October, so up to and including October 18th, we're currently sitting at 99% of planned service delivered. Next slide, please. Similar to the previous graphic, you'll recall that this graph shows the percentage of service delivered on a monthly basis, and each dot on the graph is the percentage of the planned service delivered on each specific day of the month. The wavy line running horizontally across is the monthly average, and it's essentially the service trend. And then the dotted line across the top of the graph represents the 97% service delivered threshold. Again, we continue to see for the month of September and so far in October that there's high overall monthly reliability. What we're also seeing is that those dots, the individual days of service, are clustered very closely together, and they're largely above the 97% threshold. This means that there's less and less variability in the performance on a day-to-day basis, and obviously, this is good for our customers. This is what our customers expect. This is what they deserve. You may notice, though, that there have been a few outliers. For example, on September 21st, we had some issues during the morning launch. And then on October 13th, I'm sure you all recall, there was the suspicious package at Tunney's Pasture, which caused, an impact to the service, the rail line there. And that's reflected in these graphs here. Overall, this graph confirms for us that not only is the service reliability improving on a monthly basis, but also on a day-to-day basis.
I'll just leave the goddamn meeting.
Next slide, please. So this is the third graph, and once again, just as a quick reminder, and I promise I won't do this every Transit Commission meeting, but this graph combines the previous 2 graphs into one. It uses the same variables as the previous slides and aggregates all the data you saw in the last graph into this color-coded representation. Green shows the monthly service delivered above 97%, and red shows when it's below 97%. Overall, I think, as I stated, the goal is to see highly reliable service over the course of a month, but also the one that is consistent on a day-to-day basis. The more consistent the service is on a day-to-day basis, the smaller that green box you'll see. So, if you look at September and October, you see that those green boxes are above the 97%, and they're fairly small boxes, and that shows that the service is consistent day-to-day with very few outliers, which is ultimately what we want to see. So, conversely, we're talking about reliability, but what we're also seeing, and it's just the opposite way of saying the same thing, but we're seeing a significant reduction in the number of disruptions. This obviously corresponds to a reduction in the number of delays, reduction in the number of times that we've had to use R1 replacement bus service, as well as single tracking. And we know that the R1 and the single tracking, those are the ones that are particularly disruptive for our customers. So we're seeing positive trends across the board on all those fronts. So that's the overview of the performance, and now I'll get into the rectification plan. So as you are aware, the rectification plan that RTG presented to the city in the spring outlined 7 key areas for improvement that have an impact on service reliability and ultimately impacts our customers. Overall, as Mr. Manconi indicated, significant progress has been made in resolving these issues and improving the service. With regards to vehicle brakes, largely the work here has been completed. Software updates have been made to both the train as well as the train control systems. But RTG does continue to monitor, investigate other fine-tuning of vehicles to further improve their performance. We're largely looking at ride quality, ride comfort issues at this point. But largely the work is complete. But we need to monitor it over time to make sure that it has the desired results in all weather conditions and all seasons. Regarding the overhead catenary system, or OCS, RTG has made adjustments to the OCS, which included the repair and replacement of mechanical supports, as well as conducting the end-to-end inspection. They continue to make seasonal adjustments to take into consideration the changing weather conditions. When you go from warm weather to cold weather, metal does contract and move, so they need to be on top of those things. And that's not unlike all other OCS systems in the world. There always needs to be some ongoing adjustments. But this is one of those ones. It's a critical area, so we continue to monitor, and we'll be watching this as we get into winter months. as described at the last Transit Commission meeting, all of the switch heater locations are being upgraded. This will help increase the functionality of switches during the winter season. We know that we had a number of disruptions last winter, and they were directly attributed to switches and switch heaters. Give you a little bit more detail on these ones. To start, the Transit Operations Control Center, the control system that we use that allow our staff to remotely check and verify the status of things like the sump pumps, elevators, cameras, all those types of things. It's been updated to provide our rail controllers with advanced notification of potential issues with a switch heater before there is an impact of service. So with this, when our control center staff are alerted to an issue with the heater, RTG staff can be dispatched to rectify the problem before things like snow or ice can build up and then prevent the track switch from functioning properly. This system has been updated, and our control center staff are going to receive their training on this new feature in the coming days. So that's a real positive step forward. As well, work has commenced to upgrade the switch heaters across the entire line. The switch locations from Tunney's Pasture to Tremblay Station are being upgraded with additional heat trace elements that are essentially they're installed directly on the rail and heat the rail at those switch locations. This will be in addition to the current electrical heaters and will provide a secondary means to prevent the accumulation of ice or snow. This leaves the 3 track switch locations east of Tremblay Station, where, as I said at the last Transit Commission, where all but one service disruption related to track switches occurred. We all know that this area requires additional attention and is a priority for us and for RTG, especially those track switches that are located just outside Blair Station. The work has commenced to upgrade all 3 of those locations with gas-powered switch heaters. The required ductwork at those locations is currently being installed, and all the necessary parts have been delivered or on site. RTG has confirmed that this work is expected to be complete in November and into early December. While we are concerned that this is getting late in the season, we've asked RTG to prioritize those locations, and they will be implementing 3 additional mitigation measures until such time as the permanent gas powered heaters are in. So the first mitigation that they'll be using is use of glycol, which is a liquid, and when it applied to surfaces, it helps to prevent the buildup of ice and snow for a period of time. So they'll be pre-treating essentially these locations when a weather event's on its way. They'll be pre-treating these locations with this glycol liquid. Secondly, they've committed to additional field resources will be provided to attend to these specific locations in the event that there is a winter event prior to the final installation of the gas heaters. And lastly, and most importantly, RTG will be installing temporary propane heaters until the permanent gas lines are installed. The use of these propane heaters is a very effective solution, as the switch heaters are easily adaptable to propane or natural gas, very much like a home furnace. In fact, actually, the switch heaters come that they're already pre-configured for propane, and then just with some minor adjustments and a different nozzle, essentially, you switch it over to propane. So they're moving forward on all those fronts. With regards to the vehicle traction power, the replacement of the inductors continues in progress at this time. To date, we have 18 vehicles that have been completed. RTG anticipates that this work will continue into early next year, and this will ensure that the continued improvement in the performance of the vehicles. With that said, to date, since we've put the mitigations in place, and you recall they put the new the roof cover panels and the enhanced deep cleaning on the roofs and those types of things. With that said, we haven't seen a reoccurrence of the power arcing issues since then, and we're at, as I said, 18 vehicles have been updated with the new equipment. With regards to the vehicle doors, once again, we continue to see the benefits of the updated software with very, very few door-related issues. That was one of our most common reasons for disruptions prior to the software going in, and it's dropped considerably, very, very well. RTG is still finalizing an implementation plan to introduce the additional mechanical adjustments that would help our electric train operators fix door issues should one occur. So that work continues, but as I said, the main point here is we are seeing far, far less of those issues. They're not impacting us nearly as much, and When we do have a door issue, generally we're able to get that isolated, but we know get that door shut, taken out of service, but the train gets to stay in service. So that's an important piece for us, and that's been happening well. But we know that we can make some additional improvements to further get back into service quicker. With regards to the CVS units, which are essentially part of the power system, the root cause of that issue it remains unknown. But what we've seen is that the upgraded software, very positive results. But we need to monitor this over time and make sure that we continue to have those the positive results that we're seeing. As reported at the last Transit Commission meeting, given the positive results over the summer regarding the HVAC, we're very encouraged. But we know that we have to get through the winter season. We saw how it functioned during the heat, but now we need to verify how it functions in the cold weather. So seeing some real positive stuff there, but we need to see that it continues through the winter months. So that's, we need to monitor that and watch it closely. Overall, staff are continuing to monitor performance on all these items. As I mentioned, we need to make sure that it continues over time through all different weather conditions. We know that the winter months are the most challenging, so we need to ensure that the reliability continues during this time. The last item on this list here is the city's assessment of the rectification plan. This assessment does include all these elements, the 7 items that we've reported on, but it also includes, we're taking a very holistic view. It also includes things like, the track work that we reported on previously, as well as, procedures for winter operations. Mr. Manconi indicated with regards to the winter operations, there's lots of work that's been done there. They're updating their plans based on the lessons learned. We've had several working sessions. We actually have another working session this afternoon to finalize the staffing levels and all our operational procedures. And we're looking at different types of weather events and what the different types of responses would be. But that's all going to be part of this assessment, looking at the rectification plan, as well as the other items that could impact the reliability of the line. So these independent assessments are going to continue, and they'll help us inform our future actions and decisions. The last part of my presentation, then I'll turn it over to my colleague Pat. With respect to the wheel cracks, RTG and Alstom have continued with the daily inspection regime of the wheels. This is being undertaken concurrently to the independent TSB investigation. I can't stress that enough, that the independent TSB investigation does continue. And as we mentioned in the last Transit Commission meeting, it may take some time, but they are continuing. We continue to keep our regulatory partners informed, including Transport Canada, the TSB, as well as the RMCO, or the Regulatory Monitor and Compliance Officer. He's also being kept apprised of this issue. As indicated the last Transit Commission meeting, Alstom does continue to replace the impacted wheels across the fleet. To date, the work to replace the train wheels is underway, and we've replaced the wheels were replaced on 5 vehicles. This work will continue through 2021. And it is anticipated that the replacement of the wheels will be finished sometime in the Q1 of 2021. The positive piece is that as evidenced by the positive trend service reliability, RTG continues to provide 15 trains consistently during the morning peak period and meet our daily service requirements while continuing with the vehicle inspections. So we're happy with it. We're happy in that regard. So as I mentioned, I'll now turn things over to my colleague Pat Scrimger. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. We'll talk a few words about transit recovery update and some other recent changes on the transit system. So first of all, ridership in September was at 30% of its usual levels. That is, in absolute terms, the highest it's been since the pandemic began in mid-March 2020. Well, and you'll recall that in March and April we fell down so that we were only at about 15% of our usual levels. This obviously reflects the large number of people who are working from home and also learning from home and not traveling to universities and colleges. We are continuing to monitor ridership every day, and as more customers return, we'll make adjustments as necessary. To this point, those have mostly been around the changing requirements, and this is back at the beginning of September, changing requirements of people traveling to and from high schools. Next slide, please. This graph shows in percentage terms where ridership has been from mid-March, and it fell very quickly, as you can see, and hit a low point, which was sustained through April and May, began to rise and has been rising fairly continuously from June to September, and then flattened out a little bit. Some of the ups and downs that you see there are, because this is a day-to-day, some of those ups and downs that you see are related to holidays on long weekends and the changes in travel patterns that occur on those days. Next slide, please. Last Sunday, we opened a new bus-only road at Carleton University, connecting to an internal road called Raven Road at the university. This new road connects Bronson Avenue with the Carleton University campus and avoids traffic congestion that always occurs at the corner of Sunnyside and Bronson, allows buses to get in and out more quickly as they arrive from the south and leave to the south. Primarily, this was put in as part of the stage construction. Troy, you're not muted. But it also supports the regular service that continues in there on routes 10 and 111, and it'll remain in place for those buses even after Line 2 reopens. The next slide, please. In our continuing work to do a number of small things to improve customer service and to improve and to respond to the COVID situation, we've introduced at the Rideau Center Customer Service Center what we're calling the virtual line. People arrive, can punch in the type of question and the type of service they need from us on the screen that you see there, and they get a number that gives them their place in the queue, and then their number is called out and they can go up to the counter. Coming up in the next few weeks, we'll also be adding a text function to that, so people can be further away and get a text message when their place in the queue has arrived, and also a web app so that they can register their appointment to visit without needing to visit the site. So obviously this reduces lineups, allows customers to stand further apart and further away from the customer service center and still get from us the service they need. Next slide, please. I'll report to you on Operation Mask Up, our concerted blitz, which began on October 19th, which for the first weekend was about warnings and then changed to issue fines for those who aren't complying with the mandatory mask requirement. As of this weekend, as of up to Sunday, we had 15 customers who were turned away and denied access to the system by our special constables because they declined to wear a mask. We had 7 customers who were issued fines. We had 454 customers who were coached in how to best wear their masks, as they were not wearing them properly as they encountered the special constables. There were 23 customers we saw during that time who had medical reasons not to wear masks. And before the fine started, there had been 25 written warnings issued between the 9th and the 12th. The next slide, please. Internally here at OC Transpo, since the beginning of the pandemic, there's been about 41 of our colleagues out of 3,000 of us who have tested positive for COVID-19. 22 of those staff members are in positions that are public facing and that we notified our customers about. 32 of the 41 have recovered and are back to work. And at this time, 9 are continuing to self-isolate and are recovering from their illness. As the chair mentioned, 2020 marks the 150th anniversary of public transportation in Ottawa. And so at the end of September, we launched an online interactive virtual museum to share information and allow some interaction and some participation to draw attention to Ottawa's strong history of public transit. In the virtual museum, we've got some very nice photos where you can compare then and now, a nice historical timeline with that reflects how things have changed over time, with photos to illustrate, and a little interaction to allow people to download and colorize some historic photos and upload them back so that we can have a look at them and share them if appropriate. To this point, in just a few days, a couple of weeks. We have had more than 7,900 views of the web pages, more than 53,000 social media views on links to the virtual museum, and more than 5,000 engagements on social media. So we'll keep this going and use it as a way to allow people to continue to learn more about the background that brings us to where we are today. So with that, I'll turn you back to the chair and to John for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. And please thank the employees that were involved with putting that museum together, because it is a fantastic resource and time to celebrate the past of OC Transpo. Before I turn to questions to the colleagues, I just want to clarify a couple of things that have been said here. First off, on your COVID report on the employees, I hope I can speak on behalf of the commission here and let you know that the employees are in our thoughts and prayers, and that we hope everybody recovers quickly from COVID. On the numbers for the masks, that's a great result, and I think that proves what, John, what you've been saying all along from day one, that there's a very high percentage of the ridership already wearing their masks, and I think that now we have actual numbers to show that that's working well. The one thing I want to raise here with a concern is the switches, the update about these switches. That was an issue we discussed at previous transit commissions as well. I'm happy in the sense that there's a backup plan here with the propane, so hopefully our riders are not impacted because of this delay to install. But I think we also have to talk about the elephant in the room here, and that is that SNC needs to communicate better. And it also tells me that RTM needs to verify and validate what SNC is reporting, because clearly they were not making progress on these switches when they were telling us they were. It's disappointing because there's been a lot of effort by the new leadership at RTM and our staff to work together on resolving these issues. And so I'm very disappointed, and I think it's shameful behavior on the part of the contractor to do this to us. So that said, I'm going to turn to questions from my colleagues. First up, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you again, Chair, and good morning to you and colleagues. And thank you, Chair, for those words in particular. I share your feelings and frustrations, and I wanted to focus my comments on the rectification plan that Mr. Charter updated us on. And Mr. Charter, thank you. Thank you for the update. And again, my observation is no timelines for actual fixes have been provided to the Commission. You've provided updates on what's been done since we were last briefed, but perhaps this is in line with Chair Hubley's comments. Are we getting any indication, any possible timelines to when certain problems will be fixed? On the switch heater issue, it's October. We're lucky we haven't had snow yet. In the past, we've had some snow in October, but I'm not confident that these trains will get through winter without issues with our switches. So I'm just using that as an example, but when will these issues be fixed?
Who's going to answer that for Councillor Brockington?
Chair, I'll take it. I don't know where Troy went, but so all of the elements have been completed, save and except the switches. We've started our assessment. We're doing 2 passes on the assessment. The first one was a very high level, but also in parallel with that, a very technical one. We're measuring sag in the catenary as an example. We're doing track measurements using ride-alongs and so forth. The first indicator I wanted was at a high level, was there any showstoppers? And the preliminary verbal briefing from the independent team is no showstoppers. And the reason I wanted that is I didn't want to go into winter with anything big that was out there still outstanding. The switch heaters were supposed to be done by the end of October. They did not, they advised us a week ago that they were not going to meet that timeline, but they didn't come empty-handed. We asked for a redundancy plan, and so we have the multi-pronged piece that Troy articulated. I want to go over it again because I don't know how the audio was for others, but he was breaking up when he went through it. So I just want to share with your permission, I want to go over the switch backup plan one more time.
Yeah, please do, John, please.
One of the things we didn't have last year was SCADA points, so a live telemetry into our control room, knowing the status of the heaters. We knew the status of the switches. We did not know the status of the heaters. We now have that. So in the control room, you'll know whether the pilot light is on, whether the blowers are working, and so forth. Check, that's done. We also wanted the West End switches upgraded. We did not require, nor did we think they needed to go to gas there because the data is clear. The problems were in the East End. So the electrical extension on those heaters and upgrades have been done. So check, that's done. What you're left with is Tremblay, Saint Laurent, and Blair. Blair being the most problematic switch. That work has started converting to gas, natural gas. And if they don't get that completed in time, they can use portable propane tanks to fuel that switch heater. They're also doing Tremblay and Saint Laurent, and it's been elevated to the highest level of the consortium to accelerate that. Ideally, we would have wanted that done by November 15th. That's your typical cutoff. I've done winter operations in public works. That's when you really want to sleep well at night. So, but they're not going to achieve that based on what we know today. But I can tell you they're talking to their trades. We've also given them opportunities. We'll do shutdowns on the weekends to accelerate it. And then on top of all that, they're also adding glycol, which is an anti-icing agent on the switches, which is a very good approach, and extra resources, not just when needed, but physically there. And Troy has been instrumental in giving them access gates, portals, parking spots for their staff, and so forth. So a very robust plan with multiple layers of redundancy. But Councillor Brockington, to your point, we should have maybe indicated that in the presentation. All the work has been completed. RTM has said everything, save and except those last pieces of the switches, are ready for our assessment. So that's the punchline on today's report to you. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I appreciate those details. And I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm going to start with my answer first. And I've been asked how I will deem success of this rectification plan. And I said, if you look back to February of 2020, when we were serving 185,000 people in a day, on a good day, and the trains were running, my measurement of success will be that volume in the winter with uninterrupted service. When we can consistently offer LRT service to that volume of people, because that's what the system was built for, consistently in harsh conditions, that's my measurement of success. So Mr. Manconi, after all this work through our rectification plan by SNC-Lavalin, how are you going to assure us that it's fixed and it's successful in your mind? What's your measurement?
Oh, that's a great question. So the independent assessment is critical, and getting through winter is also very critical. We all collectively, all of us, have one problem. We don't have the volume that you're talking about.
Yeah.
We're not going to have that 11,000 people per hour per direction. Having said that, I want you to know that even without the loads, we are doing things that were not part of the plan. They came up from our team and our professionals, and I'll use the door as an example. The software got installed, went through all the testing that normal railroads do. In addition to that, I gave Troy a mission. I said, put people out on the system, do not let the operators or RTM know where they are, and try to jam the doors. Okay. With backpacks, with different configurations of stress on them and everything else. The door software is performing very, very well. I would love to have a full system to test it to the point that you're talking about. We don't have that. We've got COVID. I'm hoping some ridership returns. But I also want to look at, in fairness to RTM, where the successes have occurred. 15 double vehicles, hot spares ready. Sometimes we have 2 hot spares that they don't even have to have. They've responded well to situations. Somebody was asking why there was a train parked at Tunney's a couple of weeks ago. That was a strategic hold because it was showing some early signs of a potential problem. They removed it from the line so they didn't have those long drawn out things. Like you, Councillor, I remember New Year's Eve, and that was the ultimate failure. We don't want another one of those. I've got all the ingredients to do the assessment. I don't have the volume of people, but there are a lot of boxes that are getting checked off very well. And good service equals payment equals happy customers and a council that doesn't have to deal with angry customers. And you know how sympathetic I am to the brunt that you folks have had to face, and to our customers and staff.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Charter, can you confirm the wheel cracks? Your report says all wheels will be replaced, but I heard in your presentation you said all impacted wheels will be replaced. Can you just clarify, is it all LRT wheels or just the ones showing signs of default?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it's more than just the wheels that are showing signs of a crack or of an issue. We know what the root cause is and what caused that. So every single wheel that, whether it has a crack or not, that had that, if you recall the last meeting, I talked about this jacking screw that was out a little bit too far and which caused the stress. Every one of those wheels that had that jacking screw protruding out a little bit, whether or not there's any issue with that wheel, is being replaced. But there are wheels in which the jacking screw was not an issue. Those ones are not being replaced. Those ones have been confirmed to be fine. They're, we've been referring to them as green wheels, but we're replacing all those that have had that jacking screw issue, whether or not there's been a crack or any sort of identifying issues that could populate, that could come forward.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Jar. That's it from me.
Thank you, Councillor Brockett. And next up is Commissioner Sarah Wright-Gilbert.
Good morning, everyone. I do have a couple of questions about the switches. So we've known that the East End switching problems since last winter. That became very clear when the weather started to get really cold and there was snow and ice. So my question is, if we've known about these since last winter, why was the upgrade work not completed this summer when we had spring and summer, we had lower ridership and the weather was fine? Why is it taking so long and we're now bumping up against winter weather again and having to put in these redundancy measures, as you call them?
Chair, Commissioner, so the sequencing the work was always intended to be towards the fall period for a couple of reasons. Parts for those components, they have to source those. They have to do the design in terms of the size of the feeder mains and so forth. And also sequencing, they wanted to get track work and catenary work and everything else done before that. We were fine with that plan, that the deadline was end of October. We were not fine, and I can tell you I was not pleased last week when I heard these new dates. And trust me, it's gone all the way up to the CEOs of the consortium, Mr. Kanalakis, the chair, the mayor, and I were talking about it yesterday, and we're very upset. The issue that we heard back from them was they struggled with some design timing in terms of sequencing, in terms of getting that all finalized in time. We are where we are, and it's not the best situation to be in. They know the consequences in terms of a payment and so forth. We were blunt. You're not getting paid a dime if you screw up the morning rush hour again. And I don't want our customers to go through that. So hence the backup to the backup plan that was built. We were fine with the fall. We're not fine getting into end of November, early December. Hence we asked for the triple redundancy.
Thank you. In terms of the vehicle traction power, so Mr. Charter indicated that inductors continue to be replaced and work will continue into next year, and that we haven't seen any arcing issues, but in fairness, it hasn't been winter. And so How confident are you that the covers that were put onto the tops of the trains, which is sort of a in the meantime fix, I suppose, how confident are we that this will ensure that power arcing issues will not continue to happen?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, maybe I can take that one. With regards to the arcing, if you recall, there was 3 actions that they had taken. They had to put the cover, there was the deep clean, and then there was some work with regards to, isolating, I'll just say, electrical currents in that area. So they took 3 actions, and once they did that, we did get a period of the winter in which we did not see any issue. But that arcing, although it started to occur in the winter months, it could happen at other times when you have rainy weather conditions as well. It's not just a winter phenomena. It came about at that time, but it could have happened in the spring or in the summer with heavy rainfalls as well. But so we haven't seen a reoccurrence of it. I think their solution that they brought forward has been reviewed by multiple engineers and third parties, and they've confirmed that they think that's the right step. And one of the big pieces was the deep clean on the roofs, getting that build up off that roof, and because that was creating that conductive, it allowed the current to stray a little bit, which created the arcing. So they've taken good steps. We're pushing them to to finalize that the replacement of those inductors as quickly as possible. But it will continue early into next year.
Thank you. So on the auxiliary power units, the root cause apparently continues to be a mystery. Why has it been so difficult to determine the root cause? And I ask because without a determination of a root cause, it's impossible for us to know whether the fixes that have been put in place are actually fixes that will fix the problem or are just improvements to the system, but the root cause will still cause issues. Why is it taking so long for a root cause to be determined?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's a difficult question to answer, and I'm not an engineer by any means, but I know that there's a lot of various systems that communicate and connect to each other, and they've made some software updates that they believe address the issue, but they haven't been able to state definitively that this specific software resolved this specific issue. They believe they know what the issue was, and they believe that the various updates they've done has rectified it, but they haven't been able to pinpoint this was the exact cause. And I think it's just a function of there's so many different systems that are communicating each other. There's so many different variables, and there has been work that they've been doing on a whole bunch of things, and whether it be the catenary system and how the catenary interacts with the crane, or how the CBS units interact with the hydraulic pressure units. I mean, there's all those interaction points. So they're systematically going through where there is, where the systems are communicating with each other, and saying, and trying to isolate it. But at this point, they believe they've addressed it, but they can't pinpoint this was the exact problem, this was the solution.
You can understand though why it would give myself and other customers a sense of unease that we don't know what the root cause of these problems are. And so without knowing the root cause, I don't have a high level of confidence, just based on track record, that these problems are going to be fixed. And so it does cause me a sense of unease in terms of not having a root cause determination of these problems. So you mentioned briefly in your presentation about track work, and I just wanted to ask a quick question about that. Can anyone provide an update on the track work that has been undertaken, and what's the expected date of completion? So specifically, I mean, we all know that the area around Herdman Station on either side is a bit of a rough ride. And so I just wondered if we could get an update on the track work.
So on the track work, Mr. Chair, 2 things. There's some upcoming work that will be done that'll address some of the noise and the ride comfort issue. But one of the messages, and you're going to start to hear this over and over from me, some of this stuff never ends, right? it's a railroad, and you will always be doing track work. And I just say that because I don't want people to be alarmed if they see us out there doing track work. And by the way, most of it gets done at night or if we do shutdowns and so forth. So there is some significant adjustments that we've asked for, and that's come from our work. Mr. Boyle, you remember he was here months ago, and the new management team has embraced all that. And they're mapping out some track work time slots with Troy. We want to do that after the track switches are done. And then with track, the key message is you will always be working on the track, both summer and winter, day and night. It's when you don't adjust the track and do things such as the spot weld checks and the corrugation checks and so forth that you get into significant problems in terms of that. So left unchecked, you can get major track issues, but we do have some work coming up that addresses the noise and the ride comfort piece. No firm dates yet as to when that's on, but that does not affect.
Okay, thank you. So my final questions are to do with the wheel cracks. I'm glad to see that there's a daily inspection regime of the wheels just with respect to the cracks. Have any new cracks been found since the last report? I think there were 4 at the last we had heard. Have any new ones been found?
No, Mr. Chair, since the last Transit Commission update, there hasn't been any additional cracks found.
Thank you. And finally, at the last Transit Commission meeting, Mr. Manconi made it clear that OC Transpo's conclusions with respect to the root cause of the wheel cracks were independent from the TSB investigation. Mr. Manconi was very clear about that. The TSB investigator had not come to a conclusion with respect to the root cause of the wheel cracks. In his presentation, Mr. Charter did mention that we know the cause of the root cracks, the root cause of the wheel cracks. Has something changed? Is TSB in agreement with OC Transpo and RTM's determination of the root cause?
No, it's the same as last commission meeting, Commissioner Gilbert. The team that was working on this believe they have found the root cause, but TSB will not sign off on that because they have not completed their investigation. So it's as we reported at the last commission meeting, and I made it very, very clear, and I'll say it again today, that TSB has not signed off on our conclusions. They're doing their own independent assessment.
Thank you, Mr. McConey. I do think it's important that we note that TSB has not signed off on the conclusions, and it's an independent assessment. Just to be clear, those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Next up is Commissioner Caracato.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Troy and John and Pat for your presentation. I want to highlight some of the positive things that I heard today, which is, in my mind, I guess, the virtual lineup and the text queue for the Rideau Center. I've often seen those lineups and thought we must find a different way to do this. So I'm here that you guys have found that, and things will be up and running in the weeks ahead. Pleased to hear the mask up operation is working and that only 7 people have been fined. And the Raven Road extension at Carlton U is a real good news piece as well. I sort of live near that area, and therefore I've seen the issues that have arisen. So thanks for addressing that. I wanted to give Mr. Charter the chance to talk some more about the HVAC system. You sort of touched on it a little bit, and just wondering if you want to speak a few more minutes about that and what could go wrong.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you for that. With regards to the HVAC system, obviously, it controls the temperature in the vehicle and as well as the temperature in the operator's compartment. So, there's, it needs to be a certain temperature in the winter and a certain temperature in the summer. So we saw over the summer months that, with the adjustments they've made, both, in the passenger compartment and in the operator area, that it was able to maintain the required temperature. So that's the air conditioning side of things. We need to look at it from the winter operations and the heating side of things. And we're looking at it both, as I said, from both the passenger compartment area to the operator compartment. Now, one of the challenges that I'm going to note here is that right now the trains are operating, and we Mr. Manconi, I think, indicated this last commission that we're going to continue with the operation in which all doors open at all stations. During these COVID times, we don't want to introduce a touch point for customers to touch the door to open it, to press the demand button. So that does create a challenge on the HVAC system in that, when you open up 14 doors on this train, the air, all the air that you built up inside goes out and you bring in fresh air, which is a good thing too, as well during COVID, and that you want that air to be refreshed as frequently as possible. So that does create a bit of a challenge for the HVAC system, but it did function well over the summer, and we had, if you recall, we had a very, very warm July. So we need, but I think it'd be wrong for me to say that I'm confident that I think they've got the right fix, but we do need to see it in the winter months and how it operates. But once again, operator compartment as well as the passenger compartment.
Okay, thanks. Last meeting, we heard an update on contactless payment, and I'm wondering if that's still progressing.
Chair, yes, it is. We're tracking to we're going to have a demonstration station available in December with one gate fully equipped with contactless payment systems. So you'll be able to use credit cards, Apple Pay, Apple Watch, all that stuff. And that's we want to stress test it, and that will do the testing so that we can then roll out across both rail and buses in 2021.
Okay, great. My last question is more of a general one, but are there any potential issues that you guys are watching closely and you're keeping your eye on, especially as we go into the months ahead? You mentioned a lot of boxes being checked, and just kind of want to give you an opportunity to discuss which boxes are not being checked and what's keeping you awake at night as we go into the next phase, I guess, of this.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. We can come across, and I apologize if we do, that all we're focusing is on those 7 things, but your question speaks to the broader picture. One of the things we're doing is we want to identify trends before they become big issues. And that's the positive report, and I will give RTM credit here again. There are no new issues that are creeping in. We're not seeing new things creep in. And a reminder, very complicated systems and subsystems. A lot of things are working well. The redundancy is working well. We had a serious situation on a mental health issue a couple of weeks ago on the track. The system did exactly what it was designed to do, intrusion alarms and so forth. So all of that gets lost in the negativity that we went through last year. But I'm happy to report to date, no new trends. The real focus, what's going to keep us up at night, is how does the sum of the parts perform winter, which is the true test.
Great. I was hoping you were going to mention that we weren't just focusing on these 7 issues and that you were tracking other trends, which I suspected, but wanted to give you a chance to explain yourself. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Caricato. Next up is Vice Chair Cloutier, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much. And I note the presence of our new colleague, Councillor Kitts. Welcome, Councillor Kitts. I know how important transit is out in Cumberland and the east end of the city, so it's nice to see you today, and welcome aboard, bienvenue. And Mr. Manconi, like the chair said, thank you to all OC Transpo employees who are on the job, keeping our economy moving. Our economy as such is currently, and I certainly appreciate the employees and the work that you are doing to keep transit moving in Ottawa. Just a couple of quick questions. On slide 12, the virtual line at the Rideau Centre, and we had received an email from Pat about that on a couple of weeks ago. I'm just pulling it up. But the virtual lines, what are the aspects? Was any consultation done with the Accessibility Advisory Committee or any other advisory committee with respect to that? I see the graphic on slide 12. Is that an appropriate height for somebody who might have mobility issues, and are any changes being contemplated?
Mr. Chair, accessibility of all of our customer-facing devices and services is an important part of how we design everything. This was checked against all accessibility standards by our people who specialize in that. It does meet the standards that are set in law and in regulation and under the city's design standards. Having said that, we're always ready to hear from any customer who, if when they use it, they have a difficulty, we're always ready to find a way to adapt the service to meet their needs. One of the things that is coming up in the next little while will be the ability to make those selections from a smartphone in addition to the panel. So if there's ever a person who has difficulty reaching, for instance, even the height that is specified in the accessibility regulations, this is an alternative way that they'll be able to register their interest. Also, I can say that going along with this, we've been building a lot more ability for people to make these transactions without needing to go to the Radio Center location. So we're more and more able to help these customers online or over the phone, and we'll continue to build more of that function as we go through the rest of this year and into next year.
Merci, Mr. Scrimger. I know how important accessibility is for you and your team, and I appreciate that very much. On slide 13, and this is my last question, Chair. Slide 13, the top 15 customers were denied access to the system for refusing to wear a mask. Could you give us a little bit more about those circumstances as much as you can? Was that a refusal? I do not wear a mask because for whatever reason, or is it that they did not have a mask and we had none to provide them to those customers so they could access the system?
Chair, the best way to describe that first group is 100% uncooperative customers that are basically saying, there's no way I'm wearing a mask. No, I don't have a medical condition. I'm opposed to masks. And our position is you're not coming onto the system.
Noted.
So they were uncooperative in every respect.
Thank you. And do we have a way of no. For those who may want to access the system and who don't have a mask with them at that time, but who are not uncooperative, to use your term, Mr. Manconi, do we have masks available for you forgot it today, here's a mask, make sure you bring your own next time kind of situation?
Yes, we do. The special constables have a supply of masks, and they offer.
Thank you. Thank you for that precision. Thank you, Chair. Those are all my questions.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair. Next up is Commissioner Olson. Commissioner Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
If you could speak up a bit or closer to the mic, that would help a lot.
Okay. Okay, I hope this is better. I apologize for the poor connections. I'm traveling at the moment. I have one question with respect to the mask up operation, and it may not be for OC Transpo, it may be for the legal or finance department. Is it possible for the fines that are collected for a similar amount, actually, or for the fines themselves, to actually go to providing some kind of care for treatment for COVID patients or for purchasing COVID tests, so that the fine money can actually be put to a positive use?
Chair, all revenues go into general recoveries for the city. And to be candid and blunt, we're bleeding money at the fare box. 4 million a week is up to 4 million a week is what we're losing. So we're in a deficit position, as you know. So we're trying to secure all funds. So the treasurer takes all of the fine money and puts it into the general reserves. Or in this case, I think it goes into the transit reserve. But I don't know if finance is on this call. They may want to comment.
Anybody from finance there?
I don't think they are, Chair, but generally speaking, that's the approach we've been taking right now because of the deficit situation. So redirecting funds would not, while a great idea, would not be something we'd be recommending right now because of the massive deficit we're dealing with.
Thank you, Mr. Manconi. Mr. Chairman, is this something that could be looked at by the Finance or Legal Department, again, to address what is obviously an historic occasion? Perhaps this is an opportunity to move the money to, as I say, some kind of positive action in our fight against COVID.
Okay, we can take it up before the budget meeting, Commissioner Olson. We will reach out to finance and get their comment on it.
Thank you. That's my question. Thank you.
That was your question. Okay, thank you. Mr. Manconi, if I could come back to the discussion about the switches, please. I'd like to give direction. I think the commission will agree that we really need to ask RTM, which is our overseer of the contract, to validate the supplier's plan on the switches. I really want someone to look at this now and tell us if those dates are reasonable and if steps are being taken to get it done, because we had assumed that that was being done over the summer with the updates that we were getting and everything to it. I think the level of trust here with the supplier is impacted now. And so I think we need to take that next step and actually have the supplier that we have contracted to oversee this stuff, to have them go in and also report back to us with validation that the work is being done properly. Could you arrange for that, please?
Yes, Chair, and I'm happy to report I've already done that. I was on phone calls yesterday. They're actually sitting in the supplier's offices in just outside of Toronto right now. And Troy has some staff embedded in that team that we're going to be getting an update every single day.
Okay, thank you. And we'll have to figure out how, like maybe this will be an update in between meetings, because I would think, especially when the weather forecasts start including significant snowfall, I think our ridership, albeit as low as it is right now, I think we need to get the word out to them that this work is underway. So thank you for that. I think Councillor Brockington, you had another question as well.
Yes, Chair, thank you for the opportunity. Just two things. One is I just wanted to state on the record that I've been in communication with Mr. Scrimger about the name Raven Road. There's a Raven in my ward that has OC Transpo bus service, and I just wanted to flag that my concern is confusion about two streets with the same name in case there's an accident or emergency vehicles are required. I just want to flag that for the commission. But my question is completely different, but also for Mr. Scrimger. First of all, to give you thanks for the work that went into the 150th anniversary website. I went through it all. I love the historical pictures and the history of our commission. My question, though, is this is significant. Public transit in Ottawa, 150th anniversary. In addition to the good work that you've done in a website, I think deserves more of a celebration. Obviously, with ridership down, it's hard to engage the public who are not riding our system to any great numbers at this time. But are there other plans to help commemorate this significant milestone in the history of public transit in our city? One of my suggestions previously, I think, to the chair was we could have something in our LRT stations, displays, old photographs, maybe some history or trivia about the service, but are there any other plans to celebrate this milestone?
Chair, if I could start, and then I'll certainly get Pat to add on. Councillor, to answer your question, there were other ideas that we were going to bring forward, but I can tell you that I took the decision to be very financially prudent. What I didn't want to do was spend a lot of money, when people are struggling, and our customers are struggling also. I am happy to receive any and all suggestions from any member of Commission or Council if there's things you want us to do. I was just we're just watching the nickels and the pennies very, very carefully right now, because Pat and his team put together some really good ideas. We went virtual because that was the low cost thing, but special events, especially with COVID, plaques and so forth, all things right now, I'm just being very financially prudent on that. But again, I'm at the will of Transit Commission members. If there's things you want us to consider, I'm happy to have that dialogue, and perhaps we can kind of bring it back in terms of some ideas to the committee if you like.
No, I mean, I will not push back on you being financially prudent. I completely support and endorse that. I've seen in some of our LRT stations like glass showcases where we're using them for art or displays of other. I think as a very low cost, you can maximize our high volume stations, and maybe with some old photographs, prints, whatever, very economical, but also help celebrate this milestone and tap into people who maybe have not visited the website. I just think 150 years, I think we can all celebrate this in our newsletters, and we as commissioners can help share this with the public as well. But I agree with you. I'm not looking for marching bands and parades. I do think that it's something to celebrate. So all this
great idea. No, those are the types of things. If there's some low cost ideas you want us to consider, we'll certainly take that one away. We'll take any other ones that people have.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Next up, I believe we have Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation today. Chair, I'm just wondering, the IPD on electric buses, I missed the first couple of minutes of the meeting. Was that lifted onto the agenda?
We're dealing with the IPD after. I believe it is going to be lifted, but we're trying to get through the agenda first.
Okay. Well, we can go through that first, and I'll speak to it when it comes up, Chair. Just on the Raven Road piece, I just wanted to thank staff for that. And to Councillor Brockington, Raven Road, obviously within Carleton University, it's been named Raven Road for some time now, but certainly worth a discussion there. The key with Raven Road in the future is maintaining that bus priority, to make sure that we keep that bus priority there, that it doesn't just turn into a road simply for cars. It needs to remain bus priority as it is right now. So I appreciate staff's work on that, and glad to see that Raven Road operational. That'll really help with the current shutdown of the O train. Thank you for that, and I'll speak to the IPD when it does come up later on, Chair.
Great. Okay, thank you, Councillor Menard. Vice Chair Kluche, you had something else?
If I could just interject to Councillor Menard, yes, I do have a motion that's ready to go. If it is the will of the Commission to lift that to lift that item, Councillor Menard, and to Councillor Brockington and my colleagues, if I could just, if you could indulge me, Chair. Streetcar 696, an outstanding part of Ottawa history. It's the restoration of a 1917 Ottawa streetcar that is being undertaken by volunteers, and they were to get the City Building Award in May with respect to this. So I would encourage you to Google Streetcar 696 to learn more about it. There's an element on the OC Transpo website, and I did bring this to the attention of Pat. And if anybody needs more information on that, I'd be happy to share what I know about it. It is being restored at the Colonnade Road OC Transpo Garage. Thank you for indulging me, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So seeing no other questions on this item, thank you, Mr. Manconi, for your update. Commission, is this item received? Received, thank you. Okay, on to item number 2, update on OC Transpo's operator barrier test program. Mr. Manconi, I believe you have a presentation on this.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Greer is going to be presenting this on behalf of the department. So over to you, Jim.
Sorry, thank you, John. I'll actually be presenting the presentation on the barriers. There.
Okay, sorry, my apologies. Troy.
No worries. All right, so thank you. We can go to the first slide. That'd be great, please. Thank you. Okay, so by way of background, in May of 2018, the Transit Commission was informed of a number of products that were being tested on the OC Transpo bus fleet. One of the products that was tested was a permanent bus operator barrier, or also known as an operator shield. The primary goal of this physical barrier is to restrict access to the operator's area, essentially the driver's seat, that area, and by doing so, to ultimately prevent assaults on bus operators. OC Transpo worked closely with Supply Services, and following an RFI, request for information process, testing began in April of 2019, and now we're at a point where following a year of observations and experience, the testing period is now complete. Next slide, please. Over the past several years, there's been a number of advancements in the transit industry. Transit properties across North America are working towards or have already implemented permanent operator barriers in an effort to prevent assaults on transit staff. Edmonton, TransLink in Vancouver, and the TCC are just a few of many properties that have adopted barriers. Additionally, in 2015, the federal government passed legislation that brings about firmer penalties for those that assault bus operators. Essentially, it was an amendment to the criminal code specific to assaults against transit operators. Actually, if you could go back one slide. Still there, thanks. Thank you. Essentially, it was an amendment to the criminal code specific to assaults against transit operators, and you may recall it was it was originally referred to as Bregg's Law. It was named after an Edmonton bus operator who suffered some life-changing injuries as a result of an assault over a $2.50 fare. So that's now been approved, or it's now part of the criminal code, and it becomes an aggregating factor. If someone were to assault an operator, that's taken into consideration in the essentially assigning the sentencing to the offender. And lastly, there are now a number of operator barrier systems that are available in the market, and that can either be added to a bus during the initial production or as an aftermarket addition to the bus. Now, next slide, please. Thanks. The safety and security of our staff and our customers has and always will continue to be our top priority. So to that end, standard safety equipment on buses now includes, fire suppressant and tire pressure monitoring systems, digital video recorders, CCTV cameras, emergency radios, GPS tracking. And that's just to name a few of the items. This is in addition to the extensive standard operating procedures and training that frontline staff receive. And as you know, we also have dedicated special constable unit, other supervisory staff, and we work very closely with our emergency response providers. As a result of the best practices and comparative research, OC Transpo, we determined to product test a permanent barrier as an additional safety measure. Next slide, please. The focus of the product testing was to evaluate the barrier, as that physical measure that would increase the overall safety of bus operators and in turn our customers. We wanted to verify how the buses would fit and function on our fleet. Would the presence be well received by staff and customers? Would the barriers be easy to use and stand up to the day-to-day use? Would they be easy to maintain? And would there be other safety considerations that we need to factor in if we were to implement barriers? To that end, a cross-functional group of operators, supervisors, fleet staff, management, and unit representatives oversaw the implementation of a 12-month test program, which saw 12 buses outfitted with a permanent barrier, and feedback was solicited from both operators and customers. While the product testing was initiated prior to the onset of COVID-19, the review of the barrier was also expanded to consider an analysis of the potential benefits in preventing the transmission of COVID. Next slide, please. Based on the results of the RFI process, Aero Global was selected as the qualified vendor who met the stated requirements. Two different versions of the Aero Global Slide and Stow Barrier Protection System were tested and assessed. One was a standard glass and one was an extended slide glass. Both models are relatively similar. I got a picture in a couple slides. Both models are relatively similar, with the exception that the extended glass version features a plexiglass barrier that, as it's sort of titled, it extends further towards the front windshield than the standard glass version. As I previously mentioned, 12 buses were installed with the barrier, ensuring that every conventional bus type that remains in our fleet was included in the product testing. So what we did was, there was 4 on 60-foot articulated buses, 3 on our Enviro 40-foot buses, 2 on double-decker buses, and 3 on our newest fleet, the Nova buses. Next slide, please. So in this picture here, you can see the 2 types of barriers that were tested. As I mentioned, both barriers are quite similar and provide easy access for the operator. Both barriers have a door with a piece of plexiglass affixed, which is approximately, it goes the entire length, but it ends approximately 6 to 10 inches away from the ceiling. The door is opened by a lever handle located inside the operator's compartment and is secured with a latch. So whenever the operator needs to leave their seat for whatever reason, they can simply use the door handle. It's very easy to access and very easy to use. And then, as you can see in the photos, the barrier provides it provides a physical barrier which prevents access to the operator. This can help and will help in preventing assaults, as well. Similar to the temporary shields that we put in place now. It will also assist in the prevention of COVID, while not, an important piece, while not interfering with the safe operation of the vehicle. Next slide, please. Over the course of the product testing, feedback was obtained from 370 operators and 34 customers. From the operator's perspective, the feedback varied and included a variety of topics, highlighted areas such as ergonomics, the design of the glass, the glare, durability, and sizing. One of the resounding comments that most operators expressed was feelings of increased safety, and this was echoed as well with our customers. Overall, the feedback from both operators and customers was quite positive and in support of installing moving forward with installing permanent barriers. One comment that was raised by both operators and customers was with regards to a vibration or rattling sound that the barrier made when the bus was in operation. The working group reviewed this feedback and recommends that there will be a requirement to improve the stability of the operator barrier in order to address this issue. This feedback is important to us because, should the funding be approved, we'll incorporate this feedback into any future procurement process. The overall response from the working group supported the installation of the permanent barriers across the bus fleet. This would include retrofitting the existing fleet with permanent barriers and ensuring that new bus purchases include a permanent barrier. This conclusion was also supported by OC Transpo's Policy, Health and Safety Committee, which includes our Chief Safety Officer, 3 union presidents, and the 3 union presidents representing OC Transpo's unionized employees. So now next slide, please, thank you. As I mentioned, there were opportunities for customers as well to provide feedback, which was collected using an online feedback form. Buses that were equipped with the barriers included the decal that you can see there at the bottom. And then I've also included on this slide just the project logo that was included on the online feedback form. So overall, we received feedback from 34 customers over the course of the pilot project who were essentially supportive of the barriers. Next slide, please. Towards the end of the product testing period, as I mentioned, the COVID pandemic had emerged. As outlined in OC Transpo's Transit Service Recovery Plan that was presented on June 1st, at the June 1st, 2020 Transit Commission meeting, one of the COVID measures included the installation of temporary soft barriers on all OC Transpo buses. This measure is currently in place on all OC Transpo buses, with the exception of the 12 that have the permanent barrier. The permanent barriers will replace the temporary soft barriers to act as that additional measure to enhance safety for both operators and customers, should this be approved. This photo here, it shows the temporary vinyl barrier that was installed in June as that temporary measure to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Recall, that the installation of this temporary barrier was a critical part of our transit recovery plan, which also allowed for the return of front door boarding on our buses. Okay, next slide, please. So where we're at, as a result of the project, the 12-month product test, staff do recommend proceeding with the installation of the permanent barriers on the existing OC Transpo bus fleet, subject to the approval of the 2021 capital budget, which includes a request of $6 million to retrofit 746 buses. This recommendation is to proceed with both types of barriers that were tested, the extended glass version on all bus models except for the Nova bus, which would have the standard glass. And the reason for the difference was, we took the feedback from our operators, and on the Nova bus, the configuration is a little different. So there was some, concern with some line of sight considerations. So we want to make sure, obviously safe operation of the vehicles first and foremost. So the standard glass fits better with the Nova bus, and the extended glass would go on all the other models. It is important to note that this recommendation does take into consideration buses that will be reaching end of service life in 2021. Those buses that would be retired from service, these buses would not be outfitted with the barrier. Further, it is recommended that permanent barriers be included on all future bus purchases of conventional buses, and as such becomes a standard feature on all our future bus purchases. Next slide, please. As you are aware, the budget will be tabled for council's consideration and approval. Should the $6 million in capital funding be approved as part of the 2021 capital budget, then a competitive procurement process would follow. We work closely with supply services through the procurement process to establish, the supply of the bus operator barrier systems for the fleet, and to incorporate the feedback that we received during the product test. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Troy, for that presentation. First up is Commissioner Wright-Gilbert, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions about the report because I feel like it's missing a bit of context, and so I'm hoping to provide folks with the opportunity to hear that context. In the last year, how many incidents of assaults on bus drivers have occurred?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't have that exact figure with me right now. I can't provide it to you, but it was we're in the neighborhood. I believe it was a little over 100 assaults.
Okay, but that's not an exact figure, though.
No, it's around. I think give or take 5 or 10. It's around there, and we've been seeing that consistently over the past few years. Obviously, this year it's going to be a difference with the reduction in ridership, but we'll probably see. We are seeing a reduction in the number of assaults, but that's a reflection of the reduced ridership.
Okay, because that's really helpful information to know in terms of when you're asking for $6 million for a barrier. It's helpful information to know exactly how many assaults have occurred, and subsequent to that, of that number, how many of those assaults could have been prevented by a permanent barrier. That's really important context. Do you have that number available?
No, I don't. But I do know that the majority of the assaults occur while the operator is in the driver's seat. And you see it time and time again. It's someone exiting the front door or entering the front door. They strike the operator on the way in, or spitting incidents are on the rise. That's one of our more common types of assaults, spitting. And then you see things like throwing beverages on our staff as well. So the barriers would prevent a lot of those from occurring. But it may not stop every single type of assault, but the vast majority of ours occur while the operator's in their seat, and those are the types of occurrences we see.
Right, and I mean, those are absolutely abhorrent and shouldn't happen to staff. We're in complete agreement on that. The temporary barriers that are currently in place on all of our buses as a result of our restart plan, those currently would prevent things like spitting or beverages being thrown on drivers, correct? Because they cover the whole area, and they're plastic. That theoretically they would stop those types of incidents.
That's correct.
Okay.
Chair, if I could just jump in, Commissioner Gilbert has brought us to a very important point. Actually, I'm going to correct Troy in his last answer. The answer is no, it does not. And I'll tell you something, Commissioner. I speak to just about every single operator that is assaulted. I personally call them. I spoke to an individual yesterday, and the issue with operators assaults and your issue on the stats, and then I apologize, we should have had those numbers for you. We will absolutely get you those numbers. Here's the trend line that we look for. It's the type of assault and the outcome on the operator from the assault. The individual I called yesterday was assaulted a couple days ago. He politely asked a customer to go ahead and put his bags down. It's important I tell this story because it gives a context to exactly where I think you're bringing us. He tells the customer, go ahead and put your bags down, and then you can come and pay. The customer refuses to pay. He starts to inform control that there's a customer that's not paying because we train them not to get into altercations. He warns the customer again and says, sorry, you've put your bags down, your grocery bags, you need to come and pay. And if you don't, there'll be consequences. The customer got up and sucker punched the operator through the vapor barriers on the side of his head and hit his eye. That operator is off. There's physical damage to him, but it's also the mental damage that occurs to our operators. On female operators, we're seeing trend lines that I don't like, where they are spitting on our female operators, and even worse, they are throwing hot coffee on them. I spoke to one female operator that had burns on her neck. And what happens is the mental health aspect of that, many of our operators do not want to return. They're psychologically stressed from those assaults because they come out of nowhere. So you're in a driver's seat, you have to wear your seatbelt, you have limited mobility, and quite often the type of assault is it comes in from your blind spot. And so while the numbers may not be high, 100 out of 3,000 operators, it's the outcomes of those operators. And there's many that can't even come back to work. And then there's the landmark cases. There's the operator that got killed in Winnipeg. There's instances now of operators wanting to, get involved in people wearing masks. There was a massive melee in the TransLink system 2 weeks ago. I spoke to one operator who physically got out of the bus, which he shouldn't have done, and there was weapons involved from a construction worker and so forth. So it's not necessarily the numbers, which we will absolutely get you. It's the severity of the incidents and what happens to those operators and their inability to return to work, and our obligation as employers to provide a safe work environment. So I just share that from a context perspective. We will absolutely get you those numbers, and I think some of those trends and some of those analysis might be helpful for commissioners if you like.
I appreciate that, Mr. McKenney. I appreciate that context. I appreciate that you're going to get me the numbers in the future. However, that context and those numbers would have been very helpful in the report, because we're not being asked to approve this report in the future. We're being asked to approve $6 million to go forward in the budget, today. And so that context, with respect to the types of assaults and the effects on mental health for staff would have been very helpful from a contextual perspective in the report itself when we're being asked to approve. But I appreciate you sharing that information with me. And there is no doubt that those types of assaults are life-changing and life-altering for our operators, and we don't want that to happen. So I agree with you on that. I will proceed with my questions, but I just want to make that point about the context is important when we're being asked to approve large amounts of money.
Certainly, Commissioner, just for clarification, you're not approving the money today. That comes during budget. So if there's another round that if you don't want to approve the money, it's subject to budget approval. So very good point on your part. Just it's not a green light.
No, I understand that. Thank you. I'll continue my questions. So the barriers that were installed as part of the pilot project, they were made of plexiglass, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong. And they're based on the pictures. They're about 3.5 to 4 feet tall and maybe 3 to 4 feet wide, give or take some inches. So page 8 of the report states that the overall cost for retrofitting 746 buses on the fleet is $6 million. That works out to $8,042.89 per barrier. Can we get some details as to why each barrier is costing over $8,000 to install a plexiglass barrier?
Troy?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, good question. The price, these barriers, they do cost upwards of, I think we're looking at $7,000 per barrier. I mean, we have incorporated the fact that we do need to go out to tender to get this installed. So we're going by some historical prices that we've received from other properties. We also know that this is a large project that we need to make sure that we put the right project management framework around it, and we're tracking. But that is essentially the cost of the barriers. That's what the install cost would be. But we did need to make sure that the last thing we want to do is to come forward later and say we need more money. So we put forward a number that we think what will come through when we go through the RFP process. But we have to go through that process. But that's the feedback we've received from other properties that we've talked to, and that's the feedback we received from vendors through the RFI process.
Okay, thank you. You actually answered my next question, which was very helpful. So thank you. So at the September Transit Commission meeting, our last meeting, the Commission heard that our current transit budget pressures until the end of December 2020, so the end of this calendar year, are $123.7 million, less the $74.98 million received from the Federal Provincial Safe Restart Agreement. That means that our current transit budget pressure until the end of this calendar year is $48.72 million because of lower ridership. So at the same meeting, the Transit Commission recommended that Council approve capital funds and capital projects in the amount of $30.78 million be deferred until 2021 or later. My question is, given that our budget is currently pressured and will likely remain that way for some time due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're in a second wave, and we don't know if there will be a third wave or when our ridership will come back. What are the impacts of postponing this project until we have some more stability in our finances?
So Chair, all that information will certainly be presented at budget when we table it in November. In terms of postponing this request, we see it as a safety measure. If it's the direction of Commission and Council not to approve it, we are where we are, and our recommendation to you is before you, that many agencies have gone this direction. COVID adds another layer of it. You're going to incur additional costs with those temporary barriers that are going to have to continually be replaced and reinstalled as long as COVID is around. So there will be financial implications also. But we're at your will in terms of if you want to approve it, it proceeds. If not, you have an ongoing safety threat to our staff that many other agencies have chosen to address, and many other agencies have used the COVID piece to equip the remaining fleet of their buses with safety shields. So it's really a decision for committee.
I appreciate that. The issue of COVID and COVID protection has been raised a couple of times in this discussion, and I want to raise that on page 5 of the report, it actually states that there's no specific enhancement to the design of the barriers to prevent COVID-19. I take that to mean that there's really no major difference with respect to COVID, and this is not about preventing assaults on drivers, but with respect to COVID, that there is no difference between the temporary softer barriers, we'll call them, and the permanent barriers when it comes to the transmission of the virus. It says so right in the report. And so I just want to be really clear when we're talking about COVID and preventing the transmission of COVID, that these barriers, it seems, according to the report in my reading of it, that there is no major difference between the soft barrier and the permanent barrier.
No, you'll recall we were the first agency in Canada to be certified with the APTA cleaning standards and maintenance standards, and those are simple rules. You have to have a barrier of some type. The difference here is these will become permanent. Those temporary vinyl barriers, which are strung up with Velcro and fastened to the ceiling, will need to be constantly replaced and upgraded as long as COVID is around. You need a physical barrier between your operator and the customers.
No, I agree. But my point was that there's no real difference between the two of them when it comes to the transmission of COVID. There's no proof that the permanent barriers are better at keeping COVID away from our drivers.
There is not.
Great, perfect. How how much does it cost to replace the temporary barriers per unit?
Jim Greer, do you know the cost?
Sorry, John, I'm just trying to have a bit of technical difficulty here. The cost of the barrier itself, or the cost of the temporary?
The temporary barrier, please, Mr.
Sorry. The temporary barriers cost roughly $300 for the piece of plastic that we use in the Velcro. It's a very temporary application.
So if the argument is that we install the permanent barriers now to, part of the argument, obviously, because the temporary barriers will need to be replaced over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, the math doesn't quite work out, right? $300. Thank you. $300 for a temporary barrier to be replaced versus over $8,000 for a permanent barrier. My concerns are a cost perspective. I have no disagreement when it comes to protecting our drivers. Absolutely no disagreement. I think that anyone who assaults a transit driver should be charged and it should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. These people are providing a public service, that the drivers, not the people committing assaults. My issue is that $6 million is being asked for these barriers that are plexiglass. They're costing over $8,000 per unit for installation. When we're at a time when our budget is increasingly pressured, we are about to, as per reports, we're about to ask transit customers to pay a lot more for their transit passes, yet we're going ahead and we're going ahead with a $6 million project. We've deferred other projects until 2021 or later. And my concern is that we're not looking at this project in terms of the entire holistic context, in terms of our budget. And to be quite honest with you, I agree that we need to protect our drivers, but I also think that we need to look at this from a fiscal perspective, and I will not be supporting this report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next up is Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Mr. Charter around, I'm just curious if you evaluated ease of communication for operators with passengers, and if there's any barrier to operators being able to hear passengers and vice versa, how they affect the audio on the buses.
Yes, Mr. Chair, good question. That was something that was one of the feedback that we did receive, was communication with customers. Most operators indicated that it wasn't a challenge, and but we did have a few operators that said they prefer more that they felt more and more removed from the customer. And one of the reasons why they became a bus operator was because they wanted that day-to-day connection with our riders and with our customers. So they felt that they were a little bit more removed, and it did, created an obstacle for them to communicate. But by no means that the installation of the permanent barrier prevented us from communicating anything to our operators, especially if you're thinking about things like emergency situations or something like that. The operator has the access to the microphone as well that can go through the entire bus speakers, but it doesn't fully enclose the operator. There is openings. It doesn't go all the way to the ceiling, and it doesn't go right all the way to the front window. But so some people did comment that it was a bit more of a challenge, but overall, the feedback was it increases our safety for us, and it didn't pose any issues in servicing our riders.
Okay. And just for clarity, I mean, we've identified a pretty significant workplace health and safety issue. If we weren't to implement these measures and there was an assault, next year, there likely will be, what kind of a legal risk would we be looking at as a transit operator if we don't move ahead and try in some way to mitigate safety concerns?
So that's a great question. I can tell you that we had an operator assaulted a few years ago, and he did a work refusal, which is the legislative process for when you have a safety environment concern. I can tell you that I believe in the public reporting, we spent $600,000 defending the city in terms of whether or not our workplace was safe or not. There was serious concerns about what we're doing to protect operators. That was before the trend increased in many agencies doing these barriers. And so there is concern that, we're going to have more work refusals. We've had a few of these in this context. We've had many operators that do get assaulted refusing to come back to work. And so there is some exposure to that. But I want to emphasize, from my perspective, I'm not looking through it from a financial lens, because it's a very difficult challenge to put a price on safety. And I'm not suggesting anybody's doing that. I'm just saying it's part of the equation. But with safety, your first thing is, do you have to do the activity? In this case, yes, you do. The second thing you try to do is you try to engineer it so it's a better environment, which is what safety shields are. And then the last thing is PPE. So, there are operators that were asking for protective vests and helmets and so forth due to assaults. And so there is some exposure to the city in terms of work refusals. And then legal battles in terms of getting people back to work and so forth.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Next up is Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. I do believe the employer, as a former federal government's co-chair for health and safety for 5,500 employees, the employer absolutely has an obligation to provide a safe and healthy workplace. And so OC Transpo has an obligation to try and mitigate this as best we can. But Councillor Gower, there have probably been assaults on OC Transpo drivers going back 150 years. Going back to when we pulled carriages by horses. And so we're now 150 years later as a commission looking at trying to provide additional safety features in the cabin of where the operator drives. I do have an issue with the cost. I think it's very expensive. And I also don't believe that the flimsy sheet of soft plastic is a long-term solution. It is not. It is not a long-term solution. So part 2 of the motion, Mr. Chair, says that these permanent barriers become part of our new bus purchase. I will absolutely support that. I think going forward, all new buses that OC Transpo purchases needs to have the permanent barrier. The challenge is, do you want to spend $6 million now? Is the problem so severe that we want to put out $6 million, knowing that our capital budget is competing against other capital priorities in the system? We've just delayed and deferred items from 2020. Our staff have been scrimping and saving all year. 2021 will be likely the same, that there will be other capital projects deferred because we're trying to save money. And so to staff, I say, please find the best quote. If this passes, please find the best quote possible. But is there any way that we can strike a balance? And you talked about buses that are going to be retiring in 2021 will not be outfitted. I appreciate that. Good. Is there perhaps, the next round of buses, if it's coming soon, that we can, avoid that expenditure for those buses? Are there buses retiring in 2023, 2025? I'm just trying to think of a way to, if we are going to proceed, get that $6 million price tag down any further.
Councillor, the answer is absolutely we will. And I can tell you that we're going to be doing that not just on shields, but also on bus standards, not in terms of, the life cycle, but, I know we're going to have a good discussion at budget because there's a challenging budget that's coming, and we are going to look at every opportunity, including what do we put on our buses, what standard do we equip them to, and have that dialogue with you in terms of how we can drive down unit costs, life cycle costs, and so forth. I mean, we do a great job right now, but there's always opportunities. We are talking to every vendor to come in lean and mean in terms of price point and so forth. So yes to your answer. We will do our best to drive down the unit costs, and the competitive piece is also important in terms of there's a lot of people that are finalizing equipping shields in the marketplace. So we'll see what the price points come in at.
So Mr. Manconi, why now? Could the commission defer this motion to the budget process? And the one main advantage that I suggest that would address would be the commission will have a better understanding and context about what our capital pressures are. Not just this, because I think this has merit, but I don't know where this ranks against other capital priorities that will be in your budget and will not be in your budget. And the only way to have that conversation, because we can't do that today, is to defer this a month, literally a month, to the budget process. Would you be comfortable with that, or are you under some sort of time pressure that this must be approved today?
No, it's the connection points. Well, a couple things. You're approving the go-ahead subject to budget, so you'll have another kick at it in terms of we will not proceed until you approve that. So if we get to budget and on the capital piece you don't like what you see there, you can take this and lift it out of the budget. You can remove this $6 million line item, so you'll have that opportunity. The time crunch is we have been doing the pilot for some time. The health and safety committees have been asking, the unions have been asking, and so it was part of our plan to bring this back in advance of budget on it. But again, if committee defers it, it gets deferred. You know, there's been asked for some additional stats that we should have had today, and I apologize for that. But you will have another opportunity at budget to do that. Or you could defer the whole project into next year, subject to the future budget cycles, is your other approach.
But you won't proceed until the 2021 budget is actually approved.
Correct. Correct.
So what's stopping you guys from bringing your draft budget to us with this already in it?
We were being proactive in bringing you the report first so that you had the background and then you had the budget.
Okay. I really appreciate the report that explains to us. It gives us some time outside of the budget process to understand it. Like I said, I will definitely be supporting part 2 of the motion. I'm going to hear my colleagues speak first, Mr. Chair. I do think there's merit in deferring part 1 of this motion, literally 1 month to the budget process, just so we can have an understanding of what the competing capital priorities are. Because I wouldn't want this to fail today outside of that budget discussion. So
1 minute, Commissioner.
I just wanted to raise that with you. Again, we have an obligation to provide a safe and healthy work environment for our employees. I believe all new bus builds should have this infrastructure in it. I'm just trying to mitigate that $6 million price tag when we have an infinite number of budget pressures at this time. So thanks very much.
Chair, if I could just add, because the councillor brings up some very good points. The thing on the report also is, you know, many of you have been clear, no surprises at budget. You don't walk things on as a new light items because you can't make policy decisions at budget. So I defer to the clerk, councillor. You may want to get some advice from Caitlin or Chris or other clerk staff in terms of if you're going to defer a portion of it. I just want it to be clean so that you have the flexibility that you have. So you may want to, we may want the clerk to speak at some point if there's a deferral of part of the report, so that we don't muddy the waters at budget.
Thank you, Mr. Manconi. Maybe the clerk's office may want to weigh in here with their opinion on this.
Thanks, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chair. It has been Council's previous direction that policy decisions or major service changes would generally be brought forward by staff in advance of the budget process, and then the funding for same approved through the budget process, which is why we recommended to Mr. Manconi that this be brought forward now. As Mr. Manconi indicated, this would not proceed if council then were to not approve that funding in the budget, and staff would come back with an alternate way of accomplishing this and alternate timelines.
Okay, I have no more questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. And thank you, Caitlin, for that clarification. Next up is Commissioner Caracata.
Thank you, Chair. really interesting discussion so far. I've thought a lot about both comments from Commissioner Wright Gilbert and Councillor Brockington over the last week. You know, initially I thought to myself, is this a nice to have or is this a must have? I firmly believe, especially hearing the story from Mr. Manconi earlier, that it is a must have. And if it's a must have, then I think we have to do the entire fleet. We can't, you know, just do half the fleet or have some of them with soft barrier and some of them with hard barrier, because what is that saying to our operators? You know, they pick the wrong stick that day and they're on the less safe bus versus the more safe bus. I don't think we can afford to do that. To Councillor Gower's point, we may appear negligent to our own operators if we don't proceed now to retrofit all of them. So I'm going to focus my questions particularly on you know, making sure we've got the right barrier and we're choosing the right product. And I appreciate that there will be an RFP that goes out and we'll have a chance to consider the others. But the report specifically talks about the Aero, Global, and Stow operator. And I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about that first, and then I'll have some more questions.
Troy?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So when we went through the RFI process, we had some very general sort of qualifications that we were looking for. And, you know, we wanted it to obviously be a physical barrier. We wanted it to, you know, to block off access to the operators area. It can't create any sort of visual impediments for the operators' safe operation of the bus. So they need to be able to look at the rear view mirrors and have a clear view to the right. So those are all things that we made sure that we incorporated. But as well, you know, you have to make sure that, you know, it's easily accessible for the operator. They can get in and out without any sort of hindrances. If there's an emergency, they need to be able to exit the bus real quickly. You know, and you know, as well, you know, we did look at that, you know, communication piece with our customers was another factor. So we looked at all those things. But in addition to that, you know, we are reaching out to our industry partners and looking at what models they're using, who they're going with. And although there are, you know, there are several operator barrier types out there, you know, this is one of the more prevalent ones that more and more properties tend to be using and have good experience with. So we went through the RFI process, and the Aero, Glow, and Stow was the one that met our criteria. So yeah, we think that we have a good concept and a good model. We'd have to go through, you know, there are some areas in which we want them to look at improvements, but we would go through the RFP process. And when we go through that, we're going to update our requirements. You know, the one that I shared was the rattling noise. Well, we want to make sure that we try to minimize that as much as possible. So, you know, that's the process we go through. But, you know, the barrier does, you know, I think it does what it's intended to do. And, you know, it seems like it's a good solution. But when we go through the RFP, we'll see what companies, you know, submit a bid, and you know, we'll obviously see the financials at that point, but you know, how closely it is aligned to, you know, what we've tested for the past 12 months.
Okay, good. I was going to ask you about other cities like Vancouver, Edmonton. You mentioned whether they were using the same barrier or if they had another one.
You know, there are quite a few properties that are using the same barrier as ours, but there are different ones, and you know, some properties have even gone as far as to manufacture their own in-house. You know, we wanted to go with something that was, you know, industry approved, that's been vetted, and that we know that other properties are using, that we can get some experience on. So there is some variety out there, but this is one of the ones at the forefront.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, the rattling is a concern. If we have to, you know, extra secure or stabilize that, that's probably just more cost down the road. So yeah, hopefully we have a more substantive discussion, I guess, around which barrier we choose when the time comes, or is that something that will be delegated to you guys?
Sure, that's delegated to staff.
Okay. question about the working group evaluation. Were they given a choice between, or was there ever a choice between the current soft barrier and compared to the hard barrier or the new one you're proposing? Or was it strictly to evaluate the hard barrier without referencing the other alternative?
Mr. Chair, the working group was established pre-COVID, so their focus was on assessing the hard barrier. But towards the end of that 12-month product test, COVID came in and we installed the soft barrier. But all along we knew that soft barrier wasn't a permanent solution. It's very temporary in nature, and it because it is a soft barrier, it wouldn't prevent the the majority of types of assaults that we're seeing on our operators. So no, they were focused on looking at the the functionality of the hard barrier.
Okay, sounds good. Assuming the budget next month and includes this item, how soon can these barriers be installed? Is there a time frame you're looking or working towards?
Chair, I could take that question. The barriers, depending on the productivity, the production schedule of the manufacturer and the manufacturer awards it, we are looking at installing approximately 3 a week. That would be the supply based on the conversations we've had with New Flyer, who is the Aero distributor, Canadian distributor. We're looking at a supply chain of about 3 a week of installations. So we
Okay, thanks for that. Starting when, I guess?
After it's awarded to the successful bidder.
Okay, and is there a rough timeline of how long that you think is going to take?
Well, once the RFP closes, we would be able to make sure everything meets the spec and meets the requirements, and we would start right away as soon as that was awarded. So at first it'd be pending budget approval, and then it'd put out for tender. And once it was done, we'd be starting very early in the new year, Q1 of 2021, if it went through.
Okay, sounds good. And last question is about the parabuses. Is there any discussion about whether or not those can be more secure for those operators as well, or are those vehicles just totally different?
Chair, I could take that question. Though we've reviewed the para buses, they're a different configuration, a different application. No shields have been recommended at this point or made available. We did try a temporary shield up similar to what we have in our conventional buses, but it didn't seem to work out quite as well as it has in the conventional buses. So at this point in time, there's no shields for being proposed for para.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'll just conclude by saying that I was initially concerned by the sort of $6 million sticker, but I'm convinced this is a safety thing, and I think we should be doing everything we can to protect our riders. And I'm glad to see there is a plan in place, and I hope my colleagues support this, as I will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next up is Councillor Kavanagh.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to my colleagues for their questions. I'm just looking at it. So primarily, this has started out as barriers for protection against assaults, but it's evolved into COVID, and is that so? That's the gist of it. That they now have a double duty, as it were. That we were planning this all along. Mr. Charter?
Mr. Chair, the intent was originally to focus on the how can we do more to protect our operators and prevent assaults. That was the main reason and the rationale for moving forward with the product testing. But while during the product testing, there is another added benefit to it, in that it does create that that physical separation between an operator and a customer, similar to that soft barrier, which allowed us to go back to front door boarding. So it's evolved. Yes, that's long story short. You're correct.
Yeah, I just noticed on the Government of Ontario's webpage, they have guidance for public transit agencies and passengers in response to COVID-19 about best practices for transit agencies and passengers. And I expect Councillor Brockington might be interested in, if he's probably already aware. But I couldn't help but wonder if they're giving these guidelines, if there should be some compensation specifically for this, because they're obviously wanting transit to be used, and they're wanting drivers to be protected. It makes it pretty clear in the report. So has the provincial government been approached about this specifically on these requirements?
Chair, I know the treasurer and the city manager and the discussion with the province and the federal government, along with the mayor, the COVID funding that has come through, and again, you'll see this in the tabling of the budget. We're directing it in the best manner so that we minimize the impact to the city overall. So not specifically to this one, Councillor Kavanaugh, it's a great question. The lump sum of the COVID funding is being pushed towards all the COVID-related operating costs so that we lower the operating deficit. And then, we get to a bottom line overall. And again, you'll see that when we table the budget. But specific to this, no, we haven't said that. Our position's been, give us any and all funding for COVID and let us manage, best direct it where it goes. And when we table the budget, I can get the treasurer to explain why it's better to go to the operating side than on the capital, because there's a contribution back to the Transit Reserve Fund also. So indirectly, it's going to get there, but not specifically in terms of did we target that as a funding source. We said give us any and all COVID funding to help with the deficit. So it's a great point.
Yeah, well, I see that it's meant to be to get the economy going, and it's signed by Caroline Mulrooney. Perhaps AMO can look into it. I'll pose that to Councillor Brockington. But if they're giving these guidances, and it talks about the shields, et cetera, and other things, perhaps there should be some incentive to help us out, because clearly, health is regulated by the province, as well as, and this is a report about making transit safe. So I think it should be at least looked at, so that we're looking at all options before the budget, because it's very specific, and I'd like to see it to be looked at and find out what the options are on that.
Is that it, Councillor Kavanaugh?
Yeah, I'd like to just get a confirmation that will be looked into.
Okay, Mr. Manconi or Mr. Charter?
Councillor, absolutely. And again, when you see the budget tabling, we're segregating COVID costs on the O&M side, and we're happy to do that on the capital for exactly what Councillor Kavanaugh is suggesting. So yes, I will certainly loop back to the treasurer and do exactly what the councillor is asking.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next up is Councillor Fleury joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to colleagues and John and team for the responses. I think it's creates a lot of the reality that as we operate almost 24/7 and obviously 365 days a year, there are risks outside of the traditional hours that we need to be cognizant of in terms of driver safety. John, you and I had a brief conversation yesterday as it relates to how to find the right spot between, I gave you the example of if I'm a front desk attendant at a library or at a community center, and there's an incident that happens in my facility, I have to get, off of the front desk, go into the room and address the particular matter. And incidents do happen in those scenarios. So how do we manage the customer experience, customer protection? Because there's a lot of vulnerability and the expectation of drivers, while protecting their safety in a very vulnerable seat, right? Where you're sitting facing the front, focused on the road and on the bus experience. And as you described with the coffee incidents or others that have happened, you know, those are come out of nowhere. So the shields do have a role there. Maybe if you could comment on that.
Certainly, Chair, Councillor. The function of the bus operator is to ensure the safety of everybody on board that vehicle. And there's a number of measures that are on. Council approved last term the enhanced cameras. So we didn't used to have cameras on our buses. We do now, which protects the customers and the operators. And there's been some great work that's helped us get people that are doing some things on our vehicles that they shouldn't be doing, and our trains. The other piece is the type of barrier is very, very important in that the operator needs to be able to get out freely if there is something going on in the vehicle. But before that operator leaves the seat, those of you that have been to the control room, there's a number of electronic features that are at his or her disposal, including silent alarms, the CAD system, CAD AVL system that deploys resources depending on the incidents that are underway. And the example I used the other day of the operator getting assaulted, it actually contacted control, so there was support en route. The job of the operator is to ensure the vehicle is being driven safely and to protect everybody on that bus. There are barriers in the industry that fully enclose the cab. That's not what's been typically happening in Canadian jurisdictions in particular. There's been some bad reports both for the operator and the customers where you have a fully enclosed cab, takes longer to get out, and then the operator can actually get stuck in there if there's firecrackers and so forth being thrown onto the operators. So to Councillor Fleury's point, that operator needs to be able to do what they're there to do, drive safely, and then also take care of all the passengers on the vehicle. So the in and out movements are something that we looked at specifically, and that's why we're going with proven technology.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. New York style, fully gated environment for drivers have additional risk and certainly create an environment that is not engaging in customer experience. So I appreciate what you're describing there. I would, not that I'm old, but I remember when you'd walk into a bank and there was either a full gates or a full shield of glass between you and the teller. And COVID aside, because there's a reality now during a pandemic, but I hope that the elements of proximity and the connection between driver and customer remain hyper focused, while in general sense protecting the driver as much as possible from those unfortunate incidents.
Absolutely, and that comes out loud and clear when you speak to the customers that have given us feedback on this stuff. It's that first impression and the last impression also.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. And finally, Commissioner Wright Gilbert, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of items that have come up since I last asked questions. I agree with Councillor Brockington that future buses that we order should absolutely have these barriers installed when we order them, and hopefully they won't cost $8,000 each at that time. But I do have a question. It was mentioned by one of my colleagues about manufacturing in-house. Was any thought given to manufacturing these pieces in-house?
Chair, I can look at that, answer that question. The design of the shield itself with the door and the glass, it wasn't feasible to manufacture it in-house. So it wasn't. It just we were able to manufacture temporary shields, but in this application for the permanent shield, it wasn't feasible.
Okay. So it was mentioned earlier that the installation rate for these shields would be 3 barriers installed per week. So if we do the math on that, 3 barriers installed per week of 746 buses equals 248 weeks, which is the equivalent of 4.75 years to get all of these installed. So my question is, why are we budgeting $6 million in this budget? And obviously that's a budget discussion, but it is relevant to this discussion as well and to the decision that we have to make. Why is the figure of $6 million being put forth rather than an annual budgetary allowance for the amount of barriers that could be installed per year? Why is the total amount being put forward now when it could be done over 4.75 years, which is how long it will take to install these?
Yes, Chair. I may have caused some confusion. Our initial conversations with the manufacturer that provided us the pilot project had mentioned three shift per week, three to 10. I strongly believe that we would be averaging about 20 shields installed a week. So that would greatly reduce it down. You are correct. It would be over a period of 4 years, but at 20 installed a week, I think we'd be in around the 30, 34, 35 weeks or
37. It's over 37.
Yeah, 37. Just do quick math in my head. So our target would be 20 buses per week. My apologies for the.
Right, that would be your target, but until we actually choose a manufacturer and a company, we don't actually know how many barriers could be shipped to us per week. And then of course there's the issue of the logistics of taking these buses out of service for a specific amount of time in order to install them. So we don't actually know how many buses, how many barriers we can install per week. And it is possible that this could stretch over a number of years. So my question is, why are we not stretching the cost of this over several years?
So Chair, I can assure you, we are not going to stretch this over the cost over more than 1 year. We need the full $6 million. I can tell you, New Flyer, we have hundreds of their buses. If they're the proponent or the other firms, they're all itching to get our business. We need to, if we go with this, the full $6 million gets you the full buying power to get the best unit price down, irrespective of how long it takes. But I can assure the Commissioner, there is no way we're dragging this out longer than a year to get these barriers up. I wouldn't be here asking you the funds if that's the case. I think respectfully, we're doing some math on the fly here. And again, the position is that we need the full funding to get all of the fleet equipped. We did consider partial fleet installs as a strategy to soften the costs. And the group and the union leadership and myself are saying, who gets to decide which bus is safer than the other? And so Jim's mission is going to be, forget a year, equip them as quickly as possible. And so it's under a year is his mission. So 3 a week, 20 a week, those are just numbers that that Jim is putting out on the table. The mission is get it done as quickly as possible. It's a safety issue, and that will be our commitment. And so the $6 million gives us the buying power to equip the entire fleet.
Right, and I understand that, but with respect, the math that is being done on the fly by myself, and I will admit to using a calculator, is being done based on answers that are being provided by staff. And this is information that is, again, not included in the report that was provided to this commission so that we can make a decision. So I will restate my previous point, but it's really important that we have all the information in front of us, contextual information, comparison information. How many barriers could be installed per week? What is that information based on? It is hard to make decisions based on reports that are missing important information. That is the point I am attempting to make. I think it's also important that we view this discussion in two separate contexts. One context is the protection of drivers against assault, and the separate context, which seems to be a bit of an afterthought, is in the COVID context. And so in this discussion and in the report, we've heard that the soft barriers, the temporary barriers, which cost approximately $300 to replace, they go all the way to the ceiling, right? Whereas the permanent barriers do not. There is space near the windshield. There is space between the barrier and the ceiling of the bus. So I think it's not a stretch to say that the temporary barriers in the COVID context are currently, without any scientific data, but they make more sense while we're in the midst of this pandemic in a COVID context alone than the permanent barriers themselves. I'm not hearing any disagreement.
There's no scientific evidence to substantiate that, and I will answer that question the following way. Even if COVID wasn't here, this report would be before you. again, and I apologize, we're giving you $300 numbers, numbers that aren't 100% solid. If we could just, my recommendation is the following: park the COVID piece. That was just another bolt on. We would be here before you. We have our staff. The question before you is, we have our staff that are being assaulted. Other agencies are doing this. We believe as staff, the recommendation is to prevent assaults, put in these barriers. The cost is $6 million based on all the research we've done to equip the entire fleet. The COVID is another dimension that has crept into this. And there is no scientific evidence, as you know, COVID's changing every day, about which barrier is better than other. We just know, as Councillor Kavanaugh pointed out, there should be a barrier between operator and customers. We even went a step further. They have mandatory masks. So the COVID is just another dimension that has creeped into this. So we cannot answer your question because I don't have that science, Commissioner, to be able to answer that question for you.
And that's fair, and that's why I stated that we need to separate the context for this discussion in terms of the original intent of these barriers, and then COVID, which that wasn't context that I'm providing. That's in the report itself and has been raised by city staff in this discussion as a consideration for why we should include, for why we should approve these barriers. That is the point that I am making, that this is two separate contexts. And again, I apologize for doing math on the fly, but without actual information being provided to me, I'm having to sort of, find information and glean information from the discussions and then make some conclusions in terms of missing information from the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright-Gilbert. And I'd like to say to staff that I'm thankful for Jim to do that clarification on the count, because 3 a week would have been a very big concern for me, and I'm sure everybody else on this commission. 20 a week certainly sounds like a better plan. Can I ask, is that going to be part of whatever contract is awarded, that we will have some criteria in that contract that we can hold the supplier to account to make sure that we're getting at least 20 a week?
Yes.
Will be in there? Okay. I think, commissioners, I'm going to support this motion. I hope you will as well, because I think we have to protect our employees. We have an obligation to our employees to protect them. We also have an obligation to the taxpayers to keep our liability as low as possible and take whatever steps we can here to do that. And this motion helps in both those cases. I think when we come to having the budget discussion, we had, and I'm going to use the example brought up earlier in today's meeting. One of the commissioners suggested we start hanging more pictures around the stations and stuff. That's a great idea, but if you want to look at where you're going to save some money, I would sooner invest in protection of our employees and our ridership than hanging pictures. So I'm hoping that we can get support for this motion as it is today, and give the policy direction to go forward with the shields, get the process underway, and then in November or December, I guess, for the final vote for the budget, that this gets approved. So seeing no other, sorry, Councillor Meehan, you wanted to speak as well? Councillor Meehan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it is Councillor Meehan. I've been following this discussion with great interest. One of the questions that I have, just let me say, I think it's important to protect our drivers, but at this particular time that we're providing transit in a time of COVID, and certainly a real drop in ridership. I know that going forward, we're going to have to be looking at maybe streamlining our services, maybe changing the types of buses that we'll be putting on routes, because I don't know about everybody else, but I've got buses rattling around my ward with no one in them. So I'm thinking, when we retrofit, when we put in the barriers, and if we in fact do this, and I think we probably will, are we going to be putting them on buses that we may no longer need? I'm thinking we might have to have smaller buses on some of these routes. So I'm wondering if we put the cart before the horse. will we be looking at ways to alter our the delivery of our service? And will these, and are we doing this too fast because we haven't done that just yet? Hopefully you understand what I'm asking you. Some of those big buses we may no longer need on some of these routes. That's what I'm saying. And we're going to spend this money. I'm just wondering if it makes sense at this time.
That's a great question, Councillor. We will put them on the newer buses. If there are route adjustments, particularly if we can't close the budget cap, that, and again, you're going to see all this as part of the plan for the budget tabling. If you get into service reductions beyond, into 2021, the latter part of that or beyond, you would start to drop off the older vehicles, especially if we're going to get into different size of buses, so 30-footers rather than 40-footers for suburban services and so forth. So those would come out in the back end of the staging of the retrofits on these pieces. So we'll know by midsummer if you're going to be going down the route, the path of service reductions in the future years, if we don't get that funding gap closed off. And again, you'll hear all that during the tabling of the exercise. So absolutely, and then you would equip those newer buses with the right style for the configuration.
So does that mean that some of these buses we will retrofit buses that may not be in service very long?
You may have some of that because we want to equip all of them as quickly as possible. But if you're going to get into a process of service changes and acquiring new buses, new bus types, it takes over a year to get a new bus. So you're a couple of years away before you get into a different bus style configuration is my point.
So this still makes sense at this stage of the way we're delivering transit, or the possibility that we're going to look at big changes down the road?
We believe so, yes.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you, Mr. Manconi.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Meehan. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thanks for the report. Just a couple quick questions on this. Is this an operational expense or is it a capital expense over time? Can someone just clarify that?
It's a capital expense, and the good part is on O&M they're very minimal, tightening of screws and lubrication and so forth, unless there's a weapon used or something. Okay, and so it is capital. So I mean, this sounds like it probably will extend past a year unless we have, a lot more folks installing these, just based on what we've heard. And so if it's a capital expense, then it can just be amortized over that time. And so that gives me comfort. In terms of the cost of it, $8,000 per vehicle. That's the cost of the material mostly.
Yes, that's what we budget for material.
Okay, that just seems very high to me. I know there's been a couple other questions around this, but just I want to make sure our drivers are protected, and I want to make sure that they've got the right equipment in there. And we need to I think be moving on this in some way. But I just in terms of the cost per equipment, it seems very high. It's a plexiglass solution.
Yes, Councillor, if I may, it's not just the material cost also, but it's also they all have to meet standards to be able to fit onto certain bus types for MTO rules and for the federal rules for guidelines and so forth. So they're very, very robust pieces of equipment. And if anybody wants to see one before budget, I'm happy to we can arrange to have one come and meet you somewhere and you can take a look at it firsthand. It's, the pictures don't do it all the justice if you want to see it, but it's they cost a lot to design, build, and make sure that they meet all the requirements of the suppliers of the vehicles for MTO approvals and so forth.
Okay, and it's an RFP you're putting out for them, so there'll be competition, or are we just selecting one provider? Competition,
full-blown competition. So if prices come in lower, obviously there's that funds get returned to source.
Yeah. Okay, very good. That's helpful. And the last question I have is just around the buses that go out of service. Given the material cost, can we use this new material we'll be putting on buses for maybe that'll go out of service in a few years? Can that be replaced and used again? for other buses, maybe other buses that we still have that we want to put back in commission one day? I mean, is that possible, or what happens in that case, just in general? Well, you're on mute, Mr.
Sorry, depending on the model of the year and the make. So a Nova bus that's within a year or so, perhaps it can be transferred from one model to another. But it's very model specific in terms of the stanchions and so forth. So if there is reusability, we pride ourselves in recycling as much as possible. So if we can, we will do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Menard. Mr. Manconi, on that last point from Councilor Menard, when you take buses out of service, if they're still in any way usable, they're often sold off. Is that correct?
Yes, we go to open market for bid prices on used buses.
So buses coming out of service down the road with shields in it would likely have a higher value than a bus without a shield, correct?
In the way it's trending, yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. All right, we have a request here from Councillor Brockington to basically divide the motion. I'd like some advice from the clerk's office, because basically what we would do is have one vote to say that we want to have the permanent barriers included in the future purchases of OC Transpo conventional buses, and a second vote to say that we want to provide barriers and protection for everybody on the existing fleet based on what's recommended in this report. To the clerk, can we do that, or is that a substantial change to this report?
Mr. Chair, yes, you may sever the question in this case and vote separately on the two recommendations.
Okay, then let's go ahead with the vote on, let's reverse the order here. We'll do it in two to make sure that the policy itself is supported. So we'll vote on number 2 first, which is that permanent barriers be included in future purchases of OC Transpo conventional buses. Can we get yeas and nays on that, please?
Commissioner Brockington,
Yes.
Commissioner Caracato,
Yes.
Commissioner Gower,
Yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Commissioner McKinney,
Yes.
Commissioner Olson.
Yes.
Yes. Commissioner Suds,
Yes.
Commissioner Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Williams is away, Commissioner Wright Gilbert,
Yes.
Commissioner Vice Chair Cloutier,
Oui.
and Chair Hubley.
Yes.
That's 11 in favor.
Thank you. Okay, so the second vote is on the installation of permanent barriers on the existing OC Transpo bus fleet, subject to the approval of the 2021 capital budget, which includes a request for $6 million. Can we have yeas and nays on that as well, please?
Commissioner Brockington,
No.
Commissioner Caracato,
Yes.
Commissioner Gower,
Yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Yes, but I have one question. Is it
Sorry.
is it up to 6 million?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perhaps that should be clarified. Thank you. Yes.
Commissioner McKinney,
Yes.
Commissioner Olson,
Yes.
Commissioner Suds,
Yes.
Commissioner Tierney,
Yes.
Commissioner Wright Gilbert,
No.
Vice Chair Cloutier,
Yes.
and Chair Hubley.
Yes.
9 in favor, 2 opposed.
Okay, thank you. So the item's carried. All right, next up, no on-camera items. Information previously distributed, the update on the electric bus procurement. Councillor Suds, I think you wanted to lift that.
Yes, please.
Chair, then I have a motion if I
Yes,
if
please.
I might, that pursuant to subsection 89(3) of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw number 2019-8, the Transit Commission approved that the rules of procedure be suspended to allow for the consideration of the item listed as information previously distributed, update on electric bus procurement.
Is that carried?
Carried.
Okay.
Carried.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. So we have two speakers registered to address this item. First up is Mr. Trevor Hachey.
Good morning, members of the Transit Commission, Chair Hubley, and OC Transpo staff. I just wanted to reflect a little bit about the times we're in. It's obviously a challenging financial time, and we know that if you buy electric buses, you don't actually have to pay money for the diesel gas that goes into those buses. I heard at Finance and Economic Development Committee direction to staff provided by Laura Dudas previously, asking for options to be moved forward that would help save us money. And with regard to electric buses, it is clear that using more of them in Ottawa would save the city actually quite a lot of money. It is estimated that the city and OC Transpo spend tens of millions of dollars every year on diesel gas for the buses. And so with regard to the information previously distributed, I wanted to inform you all that the federal government has announced through the throne speech a $1.5 billion infrastructure fund, specifically for electric buses and the transition toward them, and the charging infrastructure that's required for the electric buses. Now, we were really pleased in the last municipal election when Mayor Watson came out with a platform, an electoral platform item to have Ottawa move forward with an electric bus pilot project. We were also pleased last summer when the Transit Commission gave direction to staff to proceed with having 2 electric buses as part of that pilot project. But times have changed quite a lot since last summer when the Transit Commission approved that. And so we're glad to be here today to be able to discuss the current context. And I think it would be a really big mistake for the city to not apply for per capita funding out of that $1.5 billion. So a quick calculation, it seems to suggest that $1.5 billion could lead to as much as $40 million for the city of Ottawa if the federal government disperses those funds in a per capita way to municipalities that want electric buses. So what I wanted to do today in response to the memo that was circulated to Transit Commission members is to urge the Transit Commission to add more buses to the electric bus pilot project, dependent on funding from the Federal Infrastructure Fund, specifically designed to help municipalities do that. So other cities we know are buying dozens of electric buses and getting them on the road. In Toronto, it's my understanding they now have 60 electric buses on the road. Ottawa at the moment is proceeding with a 2-bus pilot project. I would urge you all to please, recognizing the positive financial implications of not having to buy diesel fuel, move forward with asking the federal government with for as much of that $1.5 billion as possible, and to expand the pilot project so that more electric buses are on the road from more manufacturers, so that we're not just testing 2 buses from the same manufacturer, we're testing 10 buses from 3 different manufacturers. So a total of 30, for example, could, I think, reasonably be funded. And I think it's reasonable to think that the federal government would provide that money to the city. So the city would save money on the capital costs of those buses, and the city would save money on the operating costs because of the lack of the need to buy the diesel fuel. And there's a lot of support for this, for the electric buses. I spent some time in recent years collecting signatures in Canada South, Canada North, Stittsville, at university campuses across the city. Over 1,700 people signed a petition urging the city of Ottawa to run an electric bus pilot project. to introduce electric buses on regular service by 2021, which it seems set to do, though only 2 buses, to purchase only electric buses starting in 2024, and to make 100% of the electric bus, to make the bus fleet 100% electric by 2035. So I don't know how much time I have left, but I just wanted to end by saying that, you know, we're pleased that the city has taken an initial first step to do a 2-bus electric bus pilot, but there's money on the table right now, tens of millions of dollars that the federal government has committed to. We should not miss that opportunity, and we should expand the pilot to include more buses, and we should be asking for as much of that $1.5 billion as possible. So I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to take any questions you good people might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hache. I'm going to ask Mr. Manconi to respond to that, because that fund that you're speaking about was in the speech from the throne, but has not passed the House or even been brought up in the House yet. So, Mr. Manconi, could you speak to that, please?
Yes, absolutely. And Mr. Hache points to the Infrastructure Bank program, which I'm happy to share with Commission. They have met with us on numerous occasions, and I want to commend them for what they've done. They have brought forward what I can describe as the most comprehensive analysis and strategy on potential funding in this space. And what I really like about it is it separates the important key drivers of how you make this decision. And I'll be very candid, I'm not worried about the technology, as I've said before, and scaling up, scaling down. All those things can be sorted out. What I really like about the Infrastructure Bank, which I can tell you, if they respond back to us in 2 of the issues that I've shared with them, we are absolutely, as my memo said, we are going for any and all money funds to accelerate into the alternate propulsion fuel business. And the only thing we need to bring back is what the motion spoke about, which is a comprehensive report. So you'll go into it eyes wide open in terms of what that does to your affordability plan. What the Infrastructure Bank proposal does is it provides funds in a very structured fashion that if your dividends are reached on the purported savings and the incremental costs of this technology, they will fund you that delta and you pay it back over the life cycle of the vehicle. It's a very interesting proposal. They've done a very good job of understanding the technical issues. And it really, what it boils down to on whether it's e-buses or CNG or hydrogen, it's the delta of the cost of the bus. And on high capacity, high range vehicles is $400,000 to $500,000, which they put in black and white. There's charging station premiums about $250,000. So you're into that $750,000 premium. How do you fund that? It's through the savings. The challenge is, and they really enjoyed our numerous meetings that we've had because we're actively engaged in the technical and the financial. There's 2 missing building blocks. The funding of the transition on the O&M side, those are high operating and maintenance costs in turning from a predominantly diesel environment. You know, we've got 800 buses, garage fit ups, training of employees, maintenance, changing of tools and so forth. No different than when we went to double-decker buses. I believe we spent $30 million in fit ups and training, new types of technology, hoists and so forth. So they were very captive and responsive to, oh, that's a building block we hadn't thought about. Will they fund that delta? Because that can add up very quickly. The second piece, and this is a government policy piece at the federal level, so it's referred to stacking rules. And what that means is you are not allowed right now to be funded from the federal government from one program and apply another funding source onto it. So you can't take gas tax and put on another funding source from the federal government. We have been clear, and the city manager, myself, and the treasurer met, and Bryce from Hydro Ottawa, or the CEO of Hydro Ottawa met, and we said, we're very intrigued by your funding model. We will absolutely be part of that. There's 3 conditions. Stacking rules need to be null and void. The delta, the transition costs need to be addressed because that'll throw your business case out the window. And then the last piece is, what does that term sheet look like? The last thing we want to do is have future councils stuck with vehicles that don't pay back the dividends, which is what happened with your 150 hybrid vehicles. You were funded on the capital, but the long-term view of the O&M was not captured. And as you know, you paid heavy premiums, and you didn't save on the fuels. There were old age batteries and so forth. So to Mr. Hashay's point, absolutely, we're engaged. We have the support of the mayor, the city manager, and the chair that we are chasing every and any funding source. The pilot can move on, and we will scale up if there's other interim funding sources, leftover PTIF funding and so forth. So we will have unit prices in. But I just wanted to share with the commission, we're fully aligned to that recent federal funding announcement. And if there's anything out there also, we're all over it. So we're very close with the infrastructure bank in terms of being congruent on how do you create a funding environment that is sustainable, that drives up the savings, and that enables the city to tip holistically on a large scale fleet size as ours. So I just thought I would share that with you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Manconi. Councillor Sudds, you had a question for the presenter?
No, I apologize. It's not for the presenter. It's for staff afterwards.
Okay, well, three people have their hands up. Councilor Menard, is your hand up to ask questions of the presenter?
Mr. Manconi's response to the presenter helped. I may ask a question during question period. I'm okay with the presenter. Thanks.
Okay, and Commissioner Caricato?
My question was also for Mr. Manconi.
Okay, so right now we're just doing questions for, we have this delegation and we have one more. So maybe if you don't have questions of the presenter, could we get people to take their hands down so we can go through this properly? Thank you. Commissioner Caricato, do you have a question? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hasse, for your presentation. Next up is Mr. Raymond Laurie of the Electrical Vehicle Council of Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So some of the stuff I wanted to cover has actually been covered. So let's go to the next slide. So what I'd like to focus on is that we heard the Energy Evolution team yesterday at the Environment Committee meeting talking about what needs to happen for the climate targets that the city is looking at implementing. So OC Transpo's transit fleet accounts for fully 52% of the city's corporate emissions. So if we don't do anything soon with that fleet, we're going to have a problem meeting the targets. Next slide, please. So if you look at the report, the Energy Evolution report on page 61, it says there that for the targets to be met, 48% of OC Transpo's passenger fleet has to be zero emission by 2025. And on page 60, 100% of the transit fleet has to be zero emission by the year 2030. Next slide, please. Also, talking about some of the costs that Trevor alluded to. So the Energy Evolution team has determined that without federal subsidies, essentially, the OC Transpo would get a return of $300 million. So they would spend $300 million less than they would otherwise by switching to zero emission buses, so to e-buses. And if the federal government funding, so infrastructure bank funding and others would be put to use, then the city would get a bigger return and a sooner return. So this will save money. Next slide, please. We've talked before about the different fuels. So if you look at CNG, which Mr. Manconi referred to again a few minutes ago, they do not contribute to reducing greenhouse gases. They're about the same as diesel. Hydrogen is unaffordable. The operating costs of buses, of hydrogen buses, are twice those of diesel, which makes it about a quarter of the operating costs of e-buses. And what we're seeing is that e-buses are really the only solution. Next slide, please. The market share globally for e-buses, this is from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, is already, or was already in 2019, 50%. So 50% of new buses delivered last year were battery electric buses. Next slide, please. So I'll skip this one and I'll go to the timeline. So right now the timelines we're looking at is that we're going to receive the 2 e-buses sometime late in 2021. We do a report in 2022 and probably do engineering work for the charging infrastructure in 2023. The bottom line is that we would get to large numbers of e-buses in service only by 2025. And I would like to argue that that is too late for us to be able to meet the targets that are in the Energy Evolution program. If you go to the next slide, yes. So 48% by 2020, that means I was assuming 900 buses. So with the revised numbers I just heard, we're talking about upwards of 350 buses that would have to be replaced with e-buses by 2025. Buses have a 15-year life cycle. We are still getting new diesel buses. So there's about 80 new Nova buses slated to arrive over the next few months. If they're replaced by 2030, then we'll have buses that will have not been used for their entire life cycle. So we'll be losing on that end. And the more we wait, the more we'll get buses that will get retired before their expected useful life. And I'll skip if you could go to a few slides down to the example of other cities. So this is, the data is a bit old here, but gives you an idea of some of the amounts that various cities have had. And reminder that Edmonton did a pilot in winter now almost 7 years ago. Next slide, please. So recommendations. So first recommendation is, seems obvious to me that e-buses are the only choice. And I would recommend that we drop this idea of doing a pilot to choose the technology. The technology is there. We need trials for OC Transpo to understand the technology and get adapted to it. But
30 seconds.
The market has decided for us already that e-buses are the solution. So we need to speed up procurement. We need to do the design of the charging infrastructure next year as early as possible, because it takes a year to 2 years easily to put the charging infrastructure in space. So we don't have in place. So we don't have any time to waste. And we'd like the city to be able to start deploying large numbers of e-buses starting in 2022 or 2023, so that we can meet those energy evolution targets and realize the climate emergency, or do take some concrete action in terms of the climate emergency that we're seeing right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilor Menard, you have questions?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. You've presented to us before. One of the key and critical pieces you've raised, obviously, around climate change. The other piece that you've raised is around, that you've raised previously, is around the type of buses and the type of charging stations. The last thing I want is for us to have a pilot that doesn't work because we got the wrong infrastructure or we got the wrong charging that doesn't work in our circumstances. And so there's been lots of testing on this about overhead charging and how this works. Can you just be as clear and concise as possible about the type of e-bus and charging stations that you see as a need for the city of Ottawa, and what we would, in order to not get this wrong, what has potentially been procured by other cities in the past that has got it wrong, specifically with regard to the type of e-bus and the charging station. Go ahead, Mr. Ray.
Okay, so I'll start with the type of e-bus. So if you look at the RFP that was that the OC Transpo has issued for 2 buses, those are the type of buses we are advocating for. So they're long-range buses. They're 250 kilometers and above, which would be enough to service the vast majority of routes in Ottawa at the moment. So we're happy with that. Now, in terms of the other types of fuels, we're less happy to hear that we're still talking about CNG, which again will not contribute to reducing greenhouse gases, because they although they're cleaner from a pollution perspective, so in terms of particulate emissions, they're better than diesel buses, and that's why cities like Los Angeles have adopted in the past CNG buses. But from a greenhouse gas perspective, they're about the same as diesel buses. And hydrogen buses, buses. Right now, there are very few pilots anywhere, and the cost of hydrogen buses is very high, as well as the operating costs. So Whistler has determined that the operating costs for hydrogen buses are twice the cost of the diesel buses. So if you're looking at the financial situation right now, there are budget pressures, and going to e-buses would allow the city to save money on the diesel that would be replaced by electricity, but also on the maintenance costs, because e-buses require less maintenance, and that's been shown in a number of situations. So that's the bus type itself. On the charging side, what we're advocating is charging that's mostly charging that's depot based, because that is less expensive to deploy. So if we're using overhead high-speed op charging, we're talking about stations, charging stations that use a pantograph, which is, there's some issues with pantographs, but we're talking about charging stations that cost a lot of money. Talking about several $1 million per charging station. They are in a fixed location, so they're not very flexible. So if you change the route in the future and your charging station is not in the right location anymore, then you're stuck with having to redeploy new charging stations in the new locations, right? So they're not very flexible. The other thing they do is they tend to charge buses at times when the buses are most used. So that would be the peak hours in the morning and the afternoon, where there's already a peak on the grid, and the electricity that's being produced is being produced by peaker plants. So from a greenhouse perspective, the electricity is less clean at that time, so we would want to avoid adding to the peak. So charging it in the depot at night or perhaps in the afternoon, if there's opportunities, would allow us to use much cleaner electricity, benefit from lower electricity rates also.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that comprehensive answer. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bernard. Mr. McConey, would you like to add any comments to this, please?
Certainly, Councillor, Chair, just to help out, first and foremost, the infrastructure bank proposal is for zero emission buses, just so everybody knows. Secondly, I know many of these conversations digress into technologies and what will work and what won't work. I can assure Council, the members of the Commission, the infrastructure bank has done an amazing job. They've leveraged Qtrick, as have we done all the work with Qtrick. They have done industry experts, sounding tables, and they have Stantec, who is on the engineering side of it. So in terms of all of those elements, what works and what doesn't work, it's just backstopped by that. That's why I was very impressed with their work. On our team, just to give Councillor Menard some comfort, I don't go to vendors to find out what works and what doesn't work. I go to the experts, and so we have a Hydro Ottawa team that has some amazing talent that is speaking to exactly your issue, Councillor Menard, on the charging stations and so forth. When we bring back the report, I can assure you we're fully aligned. It's about the right technology, looking at the long-term view, life cycle costs, back into the grid, and all those things. So just to give you comfort, we're in the same zone there in terms of those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Manconi. Councillor McKenney, I see you have a question.
Yeah, it's to staff. Is that, are we on staff
Well,
now?
we're still doing, let me release the delegation, and Councillor Sudds and Commissioner Caricato will go first on the staff, okay? Okay, so thank you, Mr. Laurie, very much for your presentation. If there's no other questions for you, we appreciate you coming out today. And so Councillor Sudds, if you want to start questions to staff.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Chair Hubley. And thank you, John, and your team for the, first of all, of course, for the memo and the update and for the answers to the questions just raised by some of my colleagues through the delegations. Just a few questions for you. First, quite simply, the memo came to us, or was dated October 7th, and it mentioned that the RFP closed on October 15th. So I'm just curious what you can share with us today as far as the response to the RFP.
I believe it's still with procurement, Councillor. I'll get an update from them, and we can certainly relay whatever we're prepared to release. They're probably doing their detailed review right now with the team, so there's not much I can share at this point.
Okay, fair enough. So another question, and we've heard a lot of discussion around seeking out various funding sources. So my question for you is, who is responsible for actively chasing these funding opportunities? Is it your team? Is it transportation services? Is it finance? Is it the climate change team? Who's tracking it and pursuing these opportunities?
It's everyone. It's all of the above. But I can tell you that at the highest order, myself, Mr. Willis, and Ms. Stephenson have great networks out into the various associations to chase any and all funding, and then we're connected to organizations such as QTRIC, the Infrastructure Bank, and so forth, and PTIF, and all those things. Finance is a gatekeeper for any announcements, but then of course we've got the mayor and the chair and councillors who do their own political lobbying and questioning of funding opportunities and things like that. So it's any and all. And then outside of that, there's innovative approaches, which again the Infrastructure Bank has brought in, which is a bit of a hybrid of a paybacks arrangement in terms of funding. So it's predominantly finance, city manager, myself, and Mr. Willis in this space.
Okay, I appreciate that and can understand the dynamics and why everyone plays a role. I think I'll be a little bit more pointed and just ask, who has the responsibility for seeking out that funding? Who does that rest with?
At the highest level would be the mayor and the city manager.
And from there?
Again, it's a bit of an iterative process. So the Infrastructure Bank, as an example, approached me because I'm in the industry. And so when I received their first meeting, I quickly mobilized the players that I said earlier on, the city manager, Wendy, Bryce from Hydro Ottawa, and so forth. But in regular discussions with both my networks and the associations, funding is always being raised on all elements, whether it's for technology, whether it's COVID, and so forth. So the various associations, depending on the industry, and in this case on transit, I've got APTA and CUDA that have their pulse on everything that AMO is doing, FCM, and so forth.
Okay. I'm asking these questions mostly just to try to understand where that accountability lies, but also to make sure there is that accountability, to make sure there is someone who is responsible for chasing this funding, and that is apparent to all of the players that are involved, including the city manager and the city treasurer. Because I think that that point person should be identified in that we don't want to miss out, and we need to know who ultimately is responsible.
Sorry, I would just add, there's the informal funding that also comes to bear. And, you know, I know some people don't want to hear about CNG, but I can tell you that CNG is writing monthly, and I'm sure some of you have received their correspondence about how they can come in and finance these capital projects. So there's the non-government funding also. So it comes in from all different sources.
Okay, I'll leave that for now. I'm not sure I have comfort, but I'll follow up on that point. My next point or question for you is, you know, we know that we have our climate change master plan that's moved ahead. There is a desire to move towards piloting carbon budgeting within, you know, hopefully one or more city departments. And I believe maybe planning has volunteered to be part of that pilot. But in my mind, you know, the single biggest source of emissions on our streets comes from our transit operations. And so what I would like to pose is whether transit operations would consider being part of that pilot and raising your hand to pilot this notion, which I respect is very new, but moving forward with carbon budget pilot.
Councillor, we're an active participant in that group. We're open to anything. What I point to staff on when I was briefed on, the proposed plan in terms of getting rid of our emissions, because we are major contributors, is, let's look back on what we've done and let's look at what you're currently doing. You took off almost 200 buses with the LRT in terms of a big carbon emission reduction, and so with that investment in LRT. Cleaner diesel buses, you converted them years ago on that front also. So, we're open to anything and everything. We're full. The signal from me to you is we're fully aligned. I would love to go to zero emissions. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give you the financial aspect of it. And I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree with some people that are out there saying if you just wave a magic wand, electric buses are going to save you money. That's why I'm excited about what Infrastructure Bank has brought forward. It's the most comprehensive, clean, simple approach to how you make this work if we want to go there. And my report that I'm bringing to you, the question will be to Commission and Council. Do you want to go to alternate technologies? You don't need more pilots. Here's the technologies. Pick one. Here's your cost. My big concern and the watch item that nobody's talking about in this space is COVID has changed your financial picture significantly. And just keep that in the back of your mind. So we're on for any budgeting approach that can help us all get to where we want to get to, which is a great livable city on all fronts.
Terrific. And refresh my memory when you're bringing that report back, if you don't mind.
So we got to get through, again, the word that nobody likes to use, the pilot, but that's just to collect some data. And I think that if the Infrastructure Bank information is, if they come forward with those last three pieces, we might be to you sooner rather than later. The complicating thing is that the financial update to the long-range financial plan was going to be just on this, but now with COVID, we have to do a wholesome update on that whole plan. So we're late into 2021 before we can bring you a holistic picture in that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the responses and the work on this. I think this obviously is, the way forward. So happy to support this work however I can. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Studd. So next up, Commissioner Caracato, please.
Sure. Back to Mr. Hashey's presentation, Mr. Manconi, is what he's asking for going to cause any potential delay to the pilot? Or is there anything else that you foresee could cause any further delays other than what we learned about in the report or the, I guess, whatever it's called?
There's no other delays. We're delayed on with COVID on getting the tender out and so forth. I think if I heard him correctly, his ask is get more electric buses. That's contingent on funding. And if so, we want to add 2, 3, 4 more buses to the pilot. We're already looking at that. If there's leftover PTIF funding and things like that, Wendy and myself and others are looking at that.
Yeah, I think he was asking for more buses to be included in the pilot. And as much as I would love to see more, I don't know if that would cause a delay in the current pilot and RFP process. And I don't want to see any further delays to this. We've been talking about it for quite a while now. I'd like to see the data come out of the pilot project so that we can move forward with certainty that we're making the right decision or change course if this is no longer the course we want to go. But I'm anxious to see that data so that we can move. Mr. Fleury's presentation about how far we are behind other cities already, and that the technology is moving quickly and perhaps faster than we are. I was concerned but reassured today that we weren't going in the right direction with the right buses, but sounds like we're on the right page for that, the long range buses. And just so that I understand, the CNG, the fuel source, why would that not reduce our overall emissions in the long term? Why was that a criticism in the second presenter's presentation?
Commissioner, you'd have to ask him that. There's pros and cons to all these fuel technologies, but I don't know the position he was taking. You would have to ask him that.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Next up is Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Chair. It is difficult to be back here today and not have an electric bus on the road. I think that this was a priority of the mayor actually during the last election, and we might see two before the next one. I guess my question is, we've got new targets, we've got priority projects that were unanimously supported yesterday by Environment Committee. I'm assuming will be strongly supported by Council. And those priority projects include, an almost 50%, a 48% of reduction of OC fleet from current to zero emissions by 2025. So I guess I'm going to ask you, do you have a plan to replace 48% of our buses by 2025 with zero emission buses? I think we need to know that before we have that discussion at Council.
Certainly. Two things, just on timing, and Councillor, you know how I work. I mean, I hear the frustration. People are late, are annoyed this is taking longer. I recommended sole sourcing at the time, and that got turned down. So we would have had the electric buses by now on that. And I think that's being missed in all this this storytelling here. So, or this narrative in terms of we're late. On the being late, it's actually not a bad thing. I know people want to get on with it, but listen, you've got to, with your city in your system, you've got to have articulated long-range these electric buses, which are now just getting introduced into the market. And also you got double deckers that are literally, close to being figured out as to how they can do. So leading edge is good, bleeding edge, I don't necessarily support that. In terms of the plan, it's going to be about money, Councillor. We can convert the fleet. It's all, and I was very clear when we're on that committee, that working group, that staff committee that brought that plan, which has a price tag attached to it. And absolutely, Councillor, if we need to convert the fleet at an accelerated rate, that is what I'm bringing to you in terms of the financial plan.
When will we see that financial plan? Like, what is the plan? I guess what I need to know is this. What is the plan? You come back to us with money, with an ask for funding. That's absolutely, that's to us to decide.
Yes.
But what I want to know is, when am I going to see a plan for how we're going to get to a zero emission fleet, 48% at least by 2025 and 100% by 2030. I mean, I don't think I have to remind anyone that 5 years down the road, it's not even 5 years down the road, it's just over 4 years down the road is like tomorrow, really. And I can't see how, with the progress we're making today, how we're going to get there. So I'm asking you, am I going to see, when are we going to see an absolute plan, attach money to it, of how we're going to get there? Because I want to get there. I don't understand how we continue to buy diesel buses, as Mr. Lurie pointed out correctly, with a life cycle of 15 years that will take us beyond 2030. Doesn't it just, again, I know that I'm repeating myself here, but I really need a clear answer, or I can give direction for you to come back with a plan with funding attached to it. But I need to hear today how we're going to get there, or when we're going to see the plan for getting there.
His comments neglect the fact that you don't have $400,000 to $500,000 extra for every bus that you need to replace. So then you'd end up short. You'd reduce your service. You'd have less buses. So we don't have that money right now. So if we're buying 10 buses, you've got to reduce that fleet size, and you'd have less service on the street. The plan I'm bringing you back says, if you move to electric, here is your plan to get there, and here is your financial cost to get there. I'm hoping that the infrastructure bank piece enables us to say we can pivot immediately. Now, that's trending towards the end of 2021, Councillor. However, COVID has really thrown a wrench here because we have to update our entire transit affordability plan, because your pressure now is not just how do you convert to electric buses. It's how do you deal with the ridership gap? Are you into major service changes? Are you reducing? Are you slowing down capital? Are you adjusting O&M? Are you changing standards? And the list is going to go on and on. So we're tracking to the end of 2021 that you would have that in terms of here's the electrification plan and the cost to do so. I have to work with Ms. Stephenson on how do we bring the rest of that to you, or can we do it in a two-step process? It's all about money right now. It's not about the
everything's about money.
And service.
Which is also about money. And affordability, which is also about money, our money and people's money. But I just want to be clear then. So we're not going to see a plan until the end of 2021 on how we're going to meet our priority project targets for energy evolution.
That's correct. And Energy Evolution knows that. They're part of the team. We were crystal clear that when they table that report to you, the immediate expectation will be, how do we convert our fleet? Because it's your biggest contributor in that space.
And are you convinced that we can get there by 2025 and 2030?
Right now, your variable is COVID. And right now, you don't have a funding source to make up the delta. So again, I'm excited about what I heard from the Infrastructure Bank. If they can change the stacking rules, they can come out with a life-term agreement sheet, and they can cover transition cost, you may be able to get there. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give you the challenge. You know, so great, you moved to electrification, but your service is horrible, or you can't afford bus shelters, or you can't afford other things, you can't afford certain standards and so forth. I want to bring you the whole picture. And so again, that's the work that I'm doing with Ms. Stephenson, because the COVID piece has changed transit operations very, very significantly. And there'll be some very difficult decisions for Transit Commission and Council to make if funding doesn't come through.
And what is my last question then is, you know, how are we being kept apprised of your conversations with the Infrastructure Bank? Has there been a formal request? You know, not just phone calls one office to the other, but when I speak to the minister here, Minister McKenna, she often asks me why we're not applying for many, like whether it's housing or transit or infrastructure. She's always asking me, why is the city not asking for this money? And I can't answer that. So, you know, have we made that formal request? You said that we need to get from them better parameters around a loan for what that would mean in terms of, you know, filling in that delta. Have we asked for that formally? Has a letter gone from the mayor? Do you need a direction today to have that happen?
We just recently met with them twice, and they were both fantastic meetings. They actually fast-tracked the meetings with us because, to exactly your point, Councillor McKenney, I said I've heard also that, you know, local MPs, MPPs are saying take our money, and I said to them, I don't need a big long-winded presentation. Come in and tell me how your model works, which they showed us, which is what I've articulated to you. That quickly moved into, within 2 weeks, a meeting with the city manager, treasurer, and CEO of Hydro. And we told them specifically, come back with those 3 things: stacking rules, transition costs, and the term sheet parameters, because we're going to negotiate that so that you have a long-term view on this. And so if you speak to those MPs, those are the 3 things. And we're awaiting that. And the city manager gave that direction to the people that we met with. So that literally has happened in the last month, and it is going at a very quick pace. I've assured them that we have a captive council, that there is a big appetite to hear about alternate fuels and funding to it. And as I've said over and over again today, this is the first real proposal I've seen that is comprehensive and touches on all the key points, save and except those 3. And the day of the funding announcement, their lead reached out to me, and I said, you owe us 3 things. get it in writing back to us, and then we'll engage very quickly. The mayor's office and the chair is positioned to do what we need to do politically if we need any of that.
And one very last question then, just on top of that, when do you expect to hear back? When should we be asking you again for their response to those three things that we've asked for? The stacking rules, the transition funding, and the term sheet.
I have a technical briefing with my team next week, and that will immediately be followed up by my bi-weekly call to my lead over at Infrastructure Bank to say, where are you? It's been a couple of weeks since their announcement. I'm going to check in with him because I have not heard back. What they're saying verbally is they're confident they can make that happen. We need to see it in writing. And, you know, I think you know Bryce very well. He used to be at the federal level on agreements. You need to get this stuff in writing in terms of this is the eligibility criteria and that they will commit to that.
Thanks. So I'll look forward to an update at our next Transit Commission on that.
Welcome.
Okay, is that it, Councillor McKenney?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kavanagh, please, followed by Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just feeling like I just came from the meeting from the environment. Was it yesterday? And seems longer ago. And then we come here, and it just feels like a disconnect sometimes when we're talking about our energy evolution and we're trying to work to get things done. I appreciate that there are meetings happening. I'm really encouraged by that. And I guess it seems to be the when. And you're having a hard time saying that. But in our discussions with the feds, and I note Councillor McKenney's comments that they're saying that they want to give us the money, but can we put some timelines on them? And I would suggest that 2025, when we're opening up that stage 2 LRT, we should be up to par with a lot of electric buses. Can we give them goals that we need to do this, that this has to be part of it? If they're going to respect our climate change goals, which should be their climate change goals, can we push on that we desperately need these timelines? And it's not just for us, it's about them too, because we're trying to do something for the environment. That's what it all comes down to. We're not trying to just say we have electric buses. We really, really do want those targets. And I know you do too. But can we put that in our push? Because I think that's our concern here. We're all obviously we're impatient because we see the numbers of and the issues related to energy and greenhouse gases. So that's my ask is, can we convince them to tie that into the climate change and give us some solid some goals?
Councillor, I think we're very much aligned. The picture we're drawing for them is we have energy evolution, we have an LRT that's being built, we have a council that is very supportive of these initiatives, we have a mayor that's very supportive of these initiatives and a chair. We have a very green city, and we have a great fleet that can be a model for Canada. And so as soon as I heard from them, that's exactly where we took them in terms of this is what we want to do so that we can line all this up. And we have a study that's underway that's going to be reporting back to council in 2021. So it's the perfect storm in terms of getting alignment. So yes, to what you're saying, that is the sales pitch, and that should be all of our sales pitches in terms of why we want the funding. We will need funding from other levels of government to make this conversion at any aggressive pace that you're looking for, irrespective of the fuel type.
If you need anything from us, I think you've got people that are ready to pound on the door for you, councillors who are want to drive the point home. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thank you, Mr. McConey, for all your answers and your help with this. It is extremely important that we get to a place where we're collaborating on this piece, and I think we're getting there. So that's great. And your mention of stacking made me laugh because I started a business, I ran a business, and that was one of the main things that I did in that business, explain the stacking rules to municipalities across the country, and they're complicated sometimes, and so and they vary. But so that made me laugh. I only have one question, and it's around the previous budgets that we had around the diesel buses we were going to purchase. And there was a large number in there. And I get the point of, well, if you're going to electric, there's a different upfront capital cost. So your initial purchase on the buy, you're going to have less buses overall to put into service. I get that. But my concern is, my big push is, how do we ensure that the funding that's been committed already for those diesel buses starts to translate into funding for electric buses? Does it have to be brand new funding, or can some of that previously committed funding on the capital side for, I think it was 170 buses, right? It was over, I think 3 years.
Yeah.
But can you just give me an update on, where are we at with that large capital investment we've made in last budgets around diesel buses? How much have we actually purchased since then? And where are we headed in terms of transitioning that funding to electric?
Sorry, Councillor, can you hear me? I had a bad connection there for a minute. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so no, if you go future years out, you've got X number of dollars for a diesel bus. That would, if we approve a plan to move to electric buses, that base would stay there. It's the top up that we're working with Infrastructure Bank to do the offset. So future purchases go there. Reminder though, it takes we're ordering a year out, so it takes a year to get buses in. So that's why it is the perfect timing. Back to Councillor Kavanaugh about, we've got a recipe to replace a good chunk of the fleet and go hard for the future years. What we're also watching now with lower loads and so forth is, do we push those fleets off a little bit, half a year or a year to drag it out so we don't have missed large purchase opportunities? That work is being done by our planning group and our fleet group. That's the briefing I was talking about. I'm going to bring you the picture of your opportunity that's before you, so that you're not just replacing 2 or 3 buses. You want large scale replacements, which speaks back to Councillor McKenney's comment about, will it be noticeable by certain years? So we're mapping all that out.
Okay,
and
so
the money stays in place.
Very good. So that capital investment previously that was for diesel bus replacements can in fact be used for electric bus purchases.
If council makes a decision that we're going with electric buses for the future fleet, yes, that would be the base, and then we're looking for the offsets on that.
Very good. Okay, and thanks to Councillor McKenney for raising that as well. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Okay, seeing no other questions, this because it's an IPD, it doesn't need to have a formal approval, but we can receive it for information if that's okay for everybody. Received?
Received.
Okay, thank you. So next up, notice of motions. I have one. Does anyone else have a motion that they want to give notice of? Okay, no one. All right, I'll read mine out. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Tierney. Whereas OC Transpo provides substantial fare discounts which reduce financial barriers to public transit for seniors, people with disabilities, people with low incomes, people aged 19 or under, and post-secondary students. And whereas the cost of providing OC Transport transit service is funded by a combination of property tax and fares collected from customers, and whereas Ottawa has been successful in achieving high transit ridership with an approximately 50-50 split between tax and fare funding, and whereas any change to the established funding model or fare structure would cause positive or negative outcomes for different groups of people. And whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has increased financial pressures and uncertainty for many transit customers and property tax payers, and whereas Mayor Watson has directed staff to table a draft 2021 transit service budget that proposes freezing fares of the Community Pass for ODSP recipients and Equipass for residents with low income to the 2019 fares, and therefore be it resolved that the Transit Commission direct staff to analyze and prepare an evaluation of possible ways to further reduce the financial barriers which reduce the ability to travel for those who need it most and can afford it the least, based on a review of solutions adopted in other cities across Canada and around the world. And be it therefore resolved that the Commission establish a working group made up of myself as the chair, Commissioner McKenney, Commissioner Caricato, the General Manager of Transportation Services, the Manager of Strategic and Advisor to the General Manager of Transportation Services, the Chief Financial Officer, and the Director of Transit Customer Systems and Planning Transportation Services Director, Employment and Social Services, or their designates to engage in the discussion on this matter. And finally, be it further resolved that staff report back to the Transit Commission as part of the next update of the city's long-range financial plan for transit, including any recommendations arising from the working group. Thank you. So we'll discuss that at our regular meeting in November. Basically the motion is to give a framework for staff to go away and save us every year budget trying to keep these fares and costs for the Equipass low. What I want to do is trying to build this into our long-term planning to try to get that, instead of just freezing fares, maybe we might even be able to go so far as to lower fares. So that's why I'm asking Councillor McKenney to join us in that effort, because I know she's been a strong proponent of that. So that's my motion. If everybody's good with that, we'll move on to other business. I want to take this opportunity to thank Chris. He's been our clerk since the start of this term of council. He's been a great assistance to myself and to the commission. We want to wish him well. As many of you may know, he's also the clerk for the Environment Committee, which meets the day before. So this is the week every month that drives Chris crazy, I'm sure. So I want to thank him for his efforts, wish him well, and welcome Eric on as our new clerk, who will be taking over the work coming up. So Chris, I salute you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you all. Okay, so Vice Chair, can I have a motion of adjournment, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Next meeting, thank you, Vice Chair. I'm assuming that's carried. I'll move on to next meeting will be a special meeting on November 4th of 2020, which will be the tabling the budget. It'll take place right after the council meeting ends. And then the next regular meeting, it will be the November 18th meeting, where we will discuss the transit budget itself. The meeting on the 4th, I should remind everybody, starts 30 minutes after that council meeting. So there we go. Thank you, everybody. I'll remind folks we have the media availability, I believe, 15 minutes after we close off here. So thank you all. Have a great time. Bye.
Thanks, Chair.
Bye, everyone.